Hello, everyone. Welcome to the VR Game of the Year, and I have already screwed up. Let me get over to this one. I still had a set on our three-person episode from last week. So, again, welcome everybody to our 2018 VR Game of the Year award show. This is, for the last 3 years, we've done this really ever since we started VR Roundtable. Each holiday season, we've decided to do an award show, and I have to say, like, this is one of my favorite shows that we do every year. So before we get going on the awards, I'll send it around to everybody else. And Gary, how is it going in your neck of the woods?
Oh, it's pretty good. Yep. Just getting ready for Christmas over here. Yeah, not too much really. Just carrying on working. We've got one more week at work, and then I've got a week and a half off. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, nothing too much to report, honestly.
Good. And Chris, we missed you last week, but welcome back. You came back for the good show, so you took the right one off. How are you doing?
That's good. I'm good. I'm doing great. So I'm finally done with my semester abroad in Montreal, so I'm not going to be in Canada again for a while. I'm all dressed up for the awards show. This is super exciting. This is the most important thing we've done all year, so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Very, very good. And Mr. Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing good. 2 cups of coffee in already. Wide awake.
So he needed 2 cups of coffee to be able to argue with me. So we're ready to duke it out with words. Let's go ahead and jump in it. It may take me a second to sort of get my bearings as I get into the flow of this, but our very, very first award will be for the best horror game of 2018. Before I get into that, so the first thing I want to do is to say that there's 4 of us, and we all vote for our best game in each category and then our overall list. And because there's 4 of us, there is no actual tiebreaker in some scenarios because it's an even number. And so what I've done is, and I'll try to identify them, is we have a sort of what I call a major majority, and that's if 3 or more of us voted for a title, and then a minor majority where 2 of us voted for a title, and then the other 2 voted for separate individual titles. So I'll try to identify those as we go. And one last housekeeping thing before we get going is I need to say thank you already to Mr. Bojan, or Bowen, if I'm saying that correctly, and Tezerum for the pre-show super chats. We've never had a super chat pre-show, so very much thanks to those guys. And to get going here, our very first award, it was a major majority for the best horror title, goes to Transference. So let me send it to you, Gary. Tell me about why you picked Transference as the best horror game for 2018.
There's some we have like a wide range of categories and genres that we've got on this list, and some of them it's very easy. It's very easy to select a game, and then others you have to think about it a little bit more. With this one, because I think there's been a few horror games that I've played this past year, but Transference by far, I mean, it was my go-to horror game for this award. I have yet to finish it, believe it or not, and I know I really need to get back into it. I played through 2 nights in a row and really, really enjoyed it. But I didn't actually get to the point where I finished it for some reason. I must be very close to the end. But the atmosphere in that game, the way it presents itself is so well done. In the past, I've spoken about horror games like A Chair in a Room, which again they have this vibe, the ambience within them. It's not jump scares necessarily. It's not gore or anything like that. And these are the kinds of horror games that I like. It's almost like the tension. It's not even necessarily horror. It's the tension that they build up. So A Chair in a Room did that kind of thing, and also Transference does it in the same way in some respects. I think the story that Transference is trying to go through is quite interesting, and again I've not reached the end of it, so I don't know how that ends up or anything like that, but from what it's doing doing a lot of the right things. I really did enjoy it. This is without a doubt my favorite horror game that I played, at least anyway.
Very good. Anthony, tell us about Transference, because it was like one of maybe 2 games you completed all year.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's one of the few, that's for sure. And I'm kind of surprised because I've completed a game that Gary hasn't. So I got one on Gary. It's interesting because originally, I don't know that a lot of us thought that Transference was a horror game. But it is a horror game, but you don't I don't know that necessarily you think of it as a horror game. You might think of it as kind of a thriller or yeah, kind of a thriller game, really. And I've always, whenever I talk about Transference, I talk about it. It's like an episode of Black Mirror, is how I feel it is, and it's just such a cool world, a cool environment. I felt like I really got to know that house. Like I know where all the rooms are, and then I know we're not nominating it in the audio category, but I think the 3D audio for Transference is really good, and I think the 3D audio makes it a more powerful horror game than it would have been otherwise, because there's a lot of VR games, man, where I don't feel like they got the audio dialed in right, but this game definitely had it dialed in, and there's certain moments that would just scare the crap out of you.
Yeah, I think it was, the horror game list in my mind was a little bit short this year. It doesn't seem like there were as many horror games, or at least any really notable ones that jumped out. So when it came time for me to nominate my choice here, Transference, however you say it, Transference, was easily my choice. And, I think it's less of, in years past, I think when we did our first one in 2016, I did A Chair in the Room. And to me, A Chair in the Room is like true horror. This is more of a psychological sort of X-Files or something feeling vibe to it, but it was still, had the jump scares to it. And, so I'm pretty comfortable with this choice. Chris, what are your thoughts on Transference for our best horror title?
Yeah, this game is really good with the atmosphere, and that's what is really important in horror games. And I'm not, as we know, I'm not the best horror game fanatic. I really am scared of horror games, and this game definitely creeped me out the most out of probably anything I've played this year. So it was an easy pick for me. The jump scares just really got me. So that's definitely why I picked Transference, and I haven't got into it as much as some of you guys, but that's because it's so damn scary, which definitely means it's best horror for me.
For real. Okay, we can jump on to the next one. Our next nomination will be for Best Strategy Game of 2018. It was another major majority for us, and that goes to a game we haven't talked about in a while, but I think one that is very, very deserving, and that is Brass Tactics. Anthony, I'll send it back to you. Talk about Brass Tactics, why it is fitting for the best strategy game of 2018.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely fits in that category. It's a strategy game, and normally this is not my type of game at all. Like real-time strategy, I've always felt like in those kinds of games, it's basically like do a million different things at one time, and that just stresses me out. So I don't normally look forward to those kinds of things. But because Brass Tactics was done so well, I heard that it was done so well, and it seemed to have been done so well, I had to try it out. And the best thing I could say about Brass Tactics, period, is I don't know of another genre that has been more improved by VR than like the real-time strategy genre. It's like a marriage made in heaven. You get in there, you play Brass Tactics, moving that table up and down, grabbing the table, bringing it closer to you, and just having this huge battle taking place right in front of you. It's quite magical. And there's only a few genres that VR really enhances immediately off the bat, and I think real-time strategy is one of them, and I think Hidden Path Entertainment just absolutely killed it with this one.
I agree completely. Gary, I remember when back in, I think it was February, before Brass Tactics came out, this was a game that we knew we were going to get a review code for a little bit ahead of the public, and we were excited in that sense because we knew it was a relatively major title, but I don't think any of us were really expecting that we would all enjoy it as much as we did. So, tell me what your initial thoughts were for Brass Tactics. God, I can't speak today. And anything else you want to say about 2018 relative to it.
Well, it took me by surprise. That's the first thing to say, because I have played strategy games before in the past, and I've never really got into real-time strategy too much. Now and again I have, but I've never really been a huge fan of those types of games, similar to Anthony. And the surprise for me, while playing through the campaign of this game, I really got sucked in, and I played through it on, I believe, sort of normal difficulty, and then I immediately went back and started to play it on hard. I didn't get too far with it on hard. I'm sort of stuck there now, honestly. But there's a certain novelty with VR, and to what Anthony was speaking about just there, with a certain genre being sort of elevated by VR. I do agree with that, and there's a novelty with VR in terms of scale. And we often talk about scale as being something like in, say, Elite Dangerous is something that always springs to mind. You've got these huge vistas, these huge planets, and the cockpit of your ship. It's just made so much better by it being this huge thing around you and it surrounds you. And yet, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got games like Brass Tactics. And the novelty in VR with these types of games is, even if there was no game around it, the simple novelty of having these little dioramas, these little things in front of you that you can move around and manipulate, that alone is just got some kind of attraction for some reason. But when it's built around such an incredible, simple, relatively simple strategy game, real-time strategy game, it just makes it all the more compelling for me. I absolutely love this game. Without a doubt, one of my favorite games in VR for 2018. And again, it took me by surprise to a certain extent. I highly recommend it. Anybody that's not played this or isn't even necessarily into this kind of game, give Brass Tactics a try. The campaign is worth the money, I believe, because you can play through it multiple times using multiple strategies to get your way through. But also, it's got a multiplayer factor in there as well. And I've played that quite a few times actually, multiplayer. And overall, I think the community within Brass Tactics, at least at the time when I played it, was sort of very welcoming. They'll guide you through and help you out in there as well. It's a really good multiplayer game too.
Very good, Chris. I know you played Brass Tactics a lot as well. I think you kind of maybe came hot on it a little bit later than the rest of us, or maybe I'm misremembering. But either way, I know you probably played more online than the rest of us. You're more of our social multiplayer person. So talk to us about Brass Tactics.
Yeah, what a good game that combines intuitive controls with really nice social multiplayer stuff. Because there's a lot of multiplayer games that don't have good controls or something like that, but with Brass Tactics, the touch controls are just perfect for it. Each button does exactly what you'd expect it to do, and you really get used to all the controls in it, which is something I really love about it. Everything's just so intuitive, and you can't really say that about too many games that are this complex. There's a lot of different systems going on, but everything is just kind of right there in your hands, which is really neat. And yeah, I played this all throughout the year with my friends who have VR. Because it's really, there's the free version, Brass Tactics Arena, if anyone wants to just try that, and then definitely jump for the full one if you like it. But I play it all year round, and I've actually was just talking to my friend last night, and I'm like, man, we got to play Brass Tactics again. What a good game. Like, I had some of my best times in VR versing my friends in Brass Tactics. And it's just kind of the thing where you find out all these new little, like, mechanics that you didn't know existed or something. So, like, maybe a few months ago, I think I discovered, like, if you have the blimp and you like press a button on it, suddenly your troops will spawn there. And I'm like, I had no idea that happened. So there's just all these layers that keep expanding over time. And it's really a great strategy game and one of the best VR multiplayer games I've ever played.
Yeah. I think Anthony mentioned or not sure, but I'm not really a strategy game person or a real-time strategy game person either. And I was coming into Brass Tactics. I wasn't really expecting to, sort of be hooked by it. I expected that it was going to be polished and that it was going to be really well put together, especially because it was delayed. This was originally a late 2017 game. And one of the things that stood out, I think to me that made getting into the real-time strategy aspect of it was the, just how put together the controls and the integration. Like, at no point did I feel like I was battling anything. It was just me and learning the game and nothing else. Like, I was never frustrated that a certain mechanic behaved a certain way, or I was never frustrated because I would accidentally hit a wrong button because the controls were maybe not intuitive enough or mapped out enough. And this game was just smooth in that sense. It was just really well integrated. If we had a well integrated Game of the Year nominee, this might be it for me. Before we jump into the next category, Jim Hall mentioned in chat, he says not listing any of the other contenders, honorable mentions for each category. And we will do that to an extent. In interest of saving time, we can't do that with everyone. And then in some games, like in the case of Brass Tactics, all four of us voted for it as the best strategy game. So there really were no other nominees or anything to bring up.
Hey, quick comment I want to make real quick is
Sure.
we've got about 70 people that are watching right now. And I just wanted to say if any of you guys are Redditors, Fluke did a post on the Oculus subreddit about this show. Go ahead and upvote it, because if we get way up there, we could get a lot of new people that have never ever seen our show before, and they might check it out for the first time. That'd be pretty cool. So if you're a Redditor, bounce over to the Oculus subreddit real quick, give it a nice upvote. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
That's okay. The next one is going to be for best narrative. This is not a major majority, but our consensus pick is to Red Matter. And Anthony, I know you're a fan of Red Matter. I'm sending it to you first.
Yeah, but I was the one guy that didn't vote for Red Matter as narrative. I think I was the one guy that didn't vote for it. But you know what? It's funny too, because when I think of Red Matter, I actually like the story is really good for the first couple of hours, and then I think it kind of gets super corny and goofy towards the end. But it's still an interesting narrative. But yeah, go ahead and pass it over to someone else.
All right. Well, Gary, I'll send it to you.
I can't really argue with Anthony on that. I do agree to a certain extent with what he's saying there, but it's almost like popcorn sci-fi. This it's sort of appeasing a lot of the cliches of sci-fi and that kind of stuff. And I'm a big fan of these sci-fi games anyway. And I do agree that perhaps Red Matter falls into some of like the narrative holes that a lot of sci-fi games and movies do, honestly. But at the same time, it was just a thoroughly enjoyable experience. And it was the narrative that pulled me through. After a certain amount of time with Red Matter, which I think in itself is a great game anyway, it's a puzzle game for all intents and purposes. It's an escape the room game where you're just going from room to room and you have to work out how to get to the next one. And the narrative is what pulls me through to continue doing that. The puzzles themselves are good, but they do get a little bit repetitive, I've got to say. After a little while, towards the end of the game, there are sort of some a little bit repetitive in terms of just what you're being asked to do, although the environmental challenges that you have with these puzzles do change it up a little bit. But if it wasn't for the narrative, if I didn't want to know really what happened in this weird sci-fi base, then maybe I wouldn't have finished it. And I finished it very quickly. I finished it in sort of 2-3 nights of gameplay. I think it lasted around 6 hours, something like that. Maybe I'm overestimating that, but it was something around there anyway. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and again, it goes down to really the narrative is the underlying thing that pulled me through that.
Yeah, I think I found the narrative pretty good in this game, and like you say, Gary, the puzzles are an important aspect of the game. But if the narrative wasn't there, would the feeling in puzzles be as good as they were, and vice versa? Like if the puzzles, if the other way around. Sorry, I'm managing lots of things. Apologies, Chris. I don't know to what degree if you've ever finished Red Matter. I know you played it when we first got access to it and was talking about it. So. What are your thoughts on Red Matter and it being best narrative?
Yeah, I think it really deserves best narrative from basically everything Gary and you said, but also just when I think of narrative and story, I really like to kind of be a part of the world. And with the scanner feature, you can like scan any object and be like, what's this? What is this related to in the story? And there's always like some sort of text that comes up. And I think just that level of detail really is what sold it for best narrative for me, because there's games with good stories out there that came out this year, but this story has all that kind of depth and background that you can, if you really want to, you can be in a room for like a half hour scanning everything and you're like, wow, okay, this is from this person, and like you really can start to piece together the world, which I think was really cool. And also like Lone Echo was last year, and that's why I like Lone Echo so much. So that's to me why it was best narrative, but it definitely would bring you through the story. I think without the narrative in this game, like it'd get boring very quickly.
Yep. And one of our other nominees for this game comes from Anthony, or for this genre, comes from Anthony, and he had nominated virtual reality. So we're going to send it to him to make a case for why virtual reality should have been chosen over Red Matter.
Well, one other thing I'll say about Red Matter is like that guy's voice, the guy that you're dealing with mostly, and he's like, Epsilon, you got to do this. You got to, the guy that you're talking to, wonderful voice, crystal clear audio, really good with the production value there. And that's a huge part of it. And also I'll admit, like, some of the things that Chris was talking about is there's a lot of environmental story. You pick up pictures and photos and posters, and there's a lot of little extra detail there. Red Matter kind of fell off a cliff at the end for me, though, because it just got very corny and goofy at the end, which made it very hard for me to vote for it in that category. Now, virtual reality, look, this goes to the pinwheel, baby. No, but really, there's just some hilarious stuff that is in virtual reality. I just love the way Tender Claws is the developer of this game, and whoever their writers are, like, bravo, baby, bravo, because they did a spectacular job. Just great comedy factor. I think the main guy that you're talking to, he's kind of like your boss, basically. That main guy that you talk to, like the voice work, and then you're interacting with all these different AIs, and they're so different. And they have like such interesting voices. I just thought it was an amazing job. So, just wanted to give some love to virtual reality.
No, that's very fair because, we are not always going to agree, and there's going to be other options that are valid. And that's kind of why I want to take, we'll talk about what won each category, but to be able to take it and someone to argue a point, or to give their stance when they didn't necessarily agree with the nom, I think is sort of what makes, any sort of GOTY or nomination based thing, more interesting, is to see and hear the competing perspectives. Moving on to our next category, our next nom goes to Best Sports Game. And this is a universal or a majority in that we all nominated this game. And I think it's very fair, and it goes to Creed. Like the horror genre, I don't think we had a ton of sports games this year. We don't have a ton of sports games in VR, period, but this felt like a lighter year than past years, and maybe that's just a feeling, and it's not based in any sort of fact that I have, but Creed to me was clearly and easily stood out as the best sports game. I really, really enjoyed Creed. I enjoyed it both for the physical activity that it is, the polish that Servios had put into it. But then I also enjoyed it for the sort of the nostalgia factor, the plug-in, the tie-in to the whole Rocky franchise that I've been watching these movies over the course of my whole life, and the music and the feeling. And I'll talk about, like, I think we kept it when we talked about the game back when it first came out on a normal VR roundtable episode, but now we're kind of spoiler safe. But when you're in the last match, and it kind of takes you through each round quickly, just like the movies did. And I thought that was a brilliant touch. And I remember grinning ear to ear when that was happening, because I felt like I was in a Rocky movie, and they knocked it out of the park, both from a sports angle and just from a production values and making it feel like Rocky. They kind of two birds in one stone mentality. So, Gary, I know you kind of felt the same way going through that last title match. Talk about Creed.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was the point where it sort of made the game for me. I enjoyed it before that, but that final section is so good. It's so well done, I think. We all know what we want. We want to feel like Rocky. We want to feel like we're this incredible boxer in these games, and that final match really makes you feel like that. And it's not an easy thing for them to do, I don't think. But you've got the music, you've got the crowd and everything like this. It's very cheesy and that kind of stuff, but that's what you want from this kind of game. You want it to feel like a Rocky movie. So yeah, one thing I want to mention on this as well. So we've got a lot of categories down here, and as you mentioned, Steve, there wasn't a huge amount of sort of nominations that we could think of for best sports title. But part of the reason we're so early on in VR at the moment, that there are not necessarily enough huge titles or enough nominations to fill out all of these categories, these genres. But part of the reason for us to even have these genres is to just take note and make a point of mentioning certain games. Now, obviously, like best sports category, I'm struggling to think of another game that I would put in here anyway, even if Creed wasn't a great game, but I think it is. But I think it's important to have these categories anyway, just to make a point of mentioning these games that were some of the best experiences in VR in 2018. This show really, I suppose, should be for somebody to come into VR and get some kind of recommendations. Although we're making very personal choices overall, I think that we do have a consensus on some of these genres, which just make for a fantastic list for people to come in and enjoy all of these VR games if they're new to VR. And I guess that's part of the reason, because I just wanted to acknowledge that, because some of these genres and these categories that we have, it's easy to say, why would you have a best sports category when really, we've got Creed and maybe a couple of others that could only ever even be in the running to win it. I think it's important just to mention that this really needs to be taken as a recommendation list overall.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. If you're getting VR for Christmas, and then we're going to intertwine a little bit of mobile, a little bit of PlayStation VR and PC VR. So if you're just getting into VR, you might not have all these platforms, but the games that we're going to talk about today are all certainly worth picking up, or they wouldn't have made the list. Anthony, talk about Creed or throw in any other sports title. I know you didn't necessarily nominate it, but like I mentioned, I was hard to even think of other potential winners of best sports. So if there's any other games out there that we should have that I should have considered that maybe you did, even though we all gave it to Creed.
Yeah, first of all, I'll say, Creed does deserve this award because there were times when I was in Creed. I haven't played it as much as you guys. Like, I didn't do the whole single player thing where you get to the top. Like, I didn't do that. And hearing you guys talk about it makes me think I should go back in there and do that. But my 15-year-old really loved Creed. He would always come in and want to play it. And that was the only game this entire year a VR game that he wanted to play over and over, constantly coming in and wanted to play it. So I know that it definitely has some value there. And there were certain moments where you get those goosebumps, just the Rocky soundtrack, the production quality and all of that. But speaking to this particular category, this is a problem in VR. We do not have good sports games. They're so rare. Like, we don't have a baseball game that anybody could talk about, really. We don't have a soccer game that we can really point to. We don't have a hockey, like basketball, hockey, all of these categories. 2MD VR football is kind of a fun little football game, but and we've got a million Pong games. We've got a lot of racket-based games, but we are not doing a very good job in sports. And trying to think of another sports game for this particular year, I guess I would have to say Virtual Reality Football Club, which changed their name to Football Nation VR. Although that game, the truth about that game is, if you play that game and you put it on the experimental room scale mode and you have a wireless, like you have like TP Cast or like a wireless Vive adapter, that game is probably incredible. But if you have a wired headset, do not do it. You will kill your headset. But there really wasn't much else going on. It's kind of unfortunate, to be honest. Devs need to step it up and give us some legit sports games.
All right. Chris, what are your thoughts on Creed for Best Sports Title 2018?
Yeah, it's really hard to get a boxing game to feel good in VR. I feel like even any melee combat games usually don't feel that good in VR. So just the fact that they got the boxing feeling so good is really a big thing that I think is worth mentioning. And also I feel like this is maybe the best movie tie-in VR game maybe ever. I can't think of any other movie tie-in game that has had this much good production value and is actually a game. A lot of the times it'll be like Spider-Man VR and it's like a 2-minute crappy demo or 360 video or something. So I think this is a big step in the industry to actually start making some decent VR games attached to franchises like Rocky. So I think definitely deserves best sports. There really isn't anything else even coming close in my list that I can even think of. So if you want to be or want to play a boxing game, definitely pick up Creed right now. It's really, really good.
chat's making a couple of recommendations. Jim Hall has tabletop basketball. I don't know if he's truly nominating that one or just pointing out that it's a sports game. And then Jan Odenhall, apologies if I don't say that correctly, has said, would Echo Combat count? And I kind of see the logic there. I think Echo Combat could, one could say that it's in the sports-ish sort of genre. Moving on, the next one we're going to give to is the our overall number 5 title. So we're going to sprinkle in our 5 top overall games, and the first one we're going to give out is number 5, and that is coming in as Wipeout VR. Wipeout VR, I'll go ahead and go first, is really, quite frankly, amazing. If you have a PlayStation VR and you don't have Wipeout VR, you're doing yourself a pretty big disservice. Now, some of it is that the developers did a fantastic job. To be more specific, it's Wipeout Omega Collection, a game that had been around prior to this year. This year, they ported it to VR. Part of its success is that developers did such a good job, but also because it's a game that translates really well. You're sitting in the cockpit of this high-speed pod racing thing. I don't even know what they call them exactly. But everything just sort of came together. The stars and the moons were aligned that like this was a formula for success. The formula was there, and then the developers executed on a formula that was there. This is one of the best games I've played in VR. I haven't nearly played it as much as I would like to due to playing other games and time commitments and all that. But if you have a PlayStation VR and if you don't have Wipeout VR, as soon as you're done watching this amazing award show, go pick it up. Chris, I'm going to send it back to you. Have you played Wipeout VR?
No, that's the thing is I haven't been able to play it. So.
Okay. I forgot. So I know you're getting a PSVR here very soon.
Yeah.
Anthony, I'll go ahead and send it your way then. Talk to us about Wipeout.
Yeah, Wipeout, man. I mean, the bottom line with that game is much love to everybody that worked on it. I know Epos Game Studio. I think there was actually 3 different developers that kind of touched this game. But if anybody says PlayStation VR is not capable of high-end graphics or high-end entertainment, just put on Wipeout VR, because when you're racing through there, you're racing through that world so incredibly quickly. You have another racer that comes right in front of you and you see the exhaust coming out of it. And all of that looks great. Everything that is happening on the track itself looks great. And you would think that the trackside detail would be garbage, but it's not. It's actually very good. And they had to get this thing running on a vanilla PlayStation 4. And for everything that I've heard, it looks fabulous on a vanilla PlayStation 4 as well. So it's these guys, basically they've proven that you can have great graphics and a great VR game on PlayStation 4. Even on a vanilla PlayStation 4.
Yep. Gary.
Yeah, no, I echo everything that everybody else has said, honestly. I think this is an incredible game. And one thing I will mention is if your brain can take it, then turn off all the comfort options, because it goes to next level. If you can cope with it without getting motion sickness, it really does become, because you've got all this trackside detail, as Anthony mentioned, which can look around at the beginning of the race, and then it will close in. But if you go into options, you can turn all of this off and have an incredible vista while you're racing around as well. So if you're able to do that, I highly recommend doing that. But as a game, again, I'll just echo what Anthony said back then about people complaining about how PS4 or PSVR could potentially be underpowered. And I agree, for certain experiences, it probably is. For this one, they've just nailed it, absolutely hit it out the park. I think it's fantastic. This is one of my favorite VR races. I'll always probably gravitate more towards my PC, like Project Cars or Project Cars 2, that kind of racer overall. But I think for what this game is trying to offer, it does a perfect job, honestly.
Absolutely. Okay, the next thing we're going to discuss. So this is point of conflict for me and Anthony, and we discussed quite a bit offline coming into the show. So what what we normally do, or what he normally does, is we like our games to have been made for sale. The games that we consider in any given year to be made for sale in that year. So if a game in particular has early access, and the year that game comes out in early access is the game that he believes it should be considered in. I feel a little bit different in the sense that I think we need to take a step back, see the forest instead of the trees, and say, what is the game that you enjoyed, that you played the most, or that if you could only play one game for the year, what game would that be? And for me, and I know that this is going to be controversial, but I have to be honest, but for me, that game is no doubt Subnautica. That was my number one game of the year. We're not going through everybody's number one game, but I chose it here because my number one would have been close to giving it our overall number 5, the way we tier our votes. And I absolutely adore Subnautica. So much so that I am now taking, if everyone remembers our show last year, how much I love Resident Evil 7. Subnautica and Resident Evil 7 are 1A and 1B. I can't choose between them as my best overall forever favorite VR game. So I love Subnautica. It is my number one game of the year. I am including it in 2018 because it came out of early access this year. You were able to actually complete the story. And also simply because I didn't play it last year or the year before or whenever the hell you could have played it when it eventually came out in early access. So it felt unfair to me as I was making my list. I'm like, well, I kind of see both sides. Should I include Subnautica? Should I not include Subnautica? But then I took a step back. I'm like, if my goal is to list out my favorite games of the year, then I have to put Subnautica in there because it is my absolute favorite game of the year. So does anybody have any counter to that? None of you other guys, I think, detail aside of whether or not it should be included in 2018 or 2017 or whatever year. But setting that detail aside, nobody else listed Subnautica for anything. So I'm curious as to why. We've had a few people in chat already mention Subnautica, so I think it's a really good game. But just curious as to why any of you guys didn't include it, or would you have if it was a clear-cut 2018 game? Anthony, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, if this was a game that arrived on February 10th and it hit Steam and it was a VR game, now you can buy it on February 10th. Like if it was like that, hell yes, it would be in my top 5. It would be threatening, like it would maybe be in my top 3 actually. But basically my take was Subnautica. Now maybe people in chat can help us out here, but I thought people were playing Subnautica I know people were playing Subnautica in VR in 2017. I know that. My question is, in late 2016, were people actually playing Subnautica in VR? Because I thought they were, but I might be mistaken. So basically, just as a response to why I want things in these clear-cut categories like this, I have a little bit of like that OCD type of thing. And for me, it's like, I like things in nice, clean boxes, you know what I mean? And so with the early access and all of that, I want something to be available in VR for the first time in this actual year of 2018. And so like if something was on like PlayStation VR, but it came over to Steam, I don't really consider that. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know, like a soup Nazi about that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's very like the type of person that I am. I prefer things to be cleanly labeled and fit where they're supposed to fit. But I couldn't get over the idea of like, but it is my favorite game. How can I make a list of my favorite games and not put my favorite game on the list? So it kind of became this counter thing. And there's always going to be like, I think going forward, it would be great like to almost take them on a game by game basis. Like here recently, Soulkeeper VR. Like I think the developers reworking that game, and it came out in early access I think in 2017, and it didn't do so well. For sake of argument, like what if that game comes out and it comes out of early access or whatever here in 2019, and it's a killer game. It just blows everyone away. Best game ever made in VR. I'm not saying it's going to be that, but just for sake of conversation, let's say it is. Would we have to not include it in 2019 year discussions. So I think it just becomes a little slippery slope. But I don't want to tie us up too long on this. But I gave my Subnautica love. Much love, Subnautica. Much love, Unknown Worlds Entertainment. And I look forward to discussing Below Zero next year because it will release in 2019.
Yeah, really quick. I just want to mention it's free on the Epic Games Store, so anyone can go pick it up now if they want to get it, because it is a good game. And I also wanted to say, I think I was playing this back in 2015 on the dev kit too. But
Probably.
they've made so much progress since then, definitely. Back then it was very bad. So like I'm really happy to see a developer taking a game and running with it and, you know, adding all these improvements. That's really commendable. So
Yep. Okay. And moving on to the next, our next major majority. And this is really a no-brainer. No one would have been able to contend with this category. But it is best platformer, and that goes to our little buddy Astrobot. I don't think anyone's going to question this decision in any way, but Gary, I'll send it to you. Keep Astrobot brief. I think he may come up again.
Yeah. I will. I think, again, this goes back to what I was talking about with the best sports category, the best platformer, you know, for us, anybody that's played Astrobot, I think it is a no-brainer. I'm sure there are some platform games and stuff like that that don't immediately spring to mind, but I don't think they will be in the running anyway. But yeah, Astrobot, without a doubt, one of the best games of the year, and it's certainly the best platform game. Yeah.
Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, you could maybe say Moss is in that category. Kin, I believe, came out in January, so you could put that in that cat. But I mean, let's be real here. Astrobot wins this in a boat race. It's not even close. They won it by a country mile, like not even close.
Yep. Okay. We don't have to spend too much time there. Moving on, our next category is for best non-game. And that's a little vague. But really we wanted to talk about something that wasn't a game, obviously best non-game, but, also an experience. So we're not talking about something that's like a tool or a utility or something like that. But, anyways, our best non-game, and I don't know if maybe it's due to, recency bias of some sort because it's a very recent experience that we talked about, but it goes to Spheres. I thought it was fantastic. Spheres is just a sort of an informative, passive experience. I thought it looked great. You know, some of the visuals were stunning, and I always like learning a little something, if it's an area that I don't normally study in or dig into. So, I thought that was pretty awesome, well worth picking up. We had, I can't remember, only two of us voted for it. Anthony, were you the other person that voted for Spheres?
I think so.
Okay. You got anything you want to say on Spheres?
Well, yeah, I just like this category here. I wish we like paid more attention to this, you know, because it's kind of hard. You don't really have a list out there of the 10 best experiences of 2018, you know, non-game type experiences, but we should have lists like that. And because like Spheres is the one that stands out to me because it has three separate parts to it. Each was a very good chunk all of its own. Now there's other stuff that was out there. You got Age of Sail, which was like a Google Spotlight stories. There was probably some other Google Spotlight stories that came out this year. You had stuff like Crow the Legend, which was awesome. You know, for me, it was actually like, I was like, Crow the Legend Spheres, and I ultimately decided on Spheres. And I really liked the last one, Pale Blue Dot. I know Gary didn't like that one as much because I think he was like expecting a different thing out of it. But I felt like the three segments of Spheres were all very good. I want to experience them several times before, like, I'm not going to delete that until I've like ran through it like a number of different times, and I thought it was really good.
All right. Gary, you did not vote for Spheres. You instead voted for Anne Frank VR. So I'm going to send it to you to discuss your vote. And if you want to say anything about Spheres, go ahead.
Well, just quickly on Spheres, I'm I can't argue with this being our overall sort of best non-game. I think it's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It didn't quite hit the mark, as I mentioned on the show when we first spoke about Spheres. It didn't quite hit the mark in terms of I wanted it to be a little bit more informative rather than the artistic angle that it took. Although it's still very impressive, in VR, it's an incredible and impressive experience. So I'm pleased it won. I did want to acknowledge Anne Frank VR, because there's a certain thing, and we spoke about this, Anthony and I think we spoke about it on the show when we were talking about Anne Frank. Or actually, I don't think I was on the show when this experience was released, and I spoke about it a little bit the week after. But Anthony mentioned on that show how you feel like you know the story of Anne Frank. You know all of these things already. You've learnt it. It's almost like part of just growing up. It's part of the culture. You just hear these things so often. You feel like you know the story. And it surprised me going into this VR experience how I really didn't know the intricacies of this story as much as I thought I did. And it takes you on a journey through those years that she was living in this house. And I think by the end of it, there's not many VR experiences that will that could even approach bringing me to tears or anything like that. But I think you've got to have a heart of stone if you don't feel some kind of emotion at the end of that experience. It's so well done, and to actually feel like you're exploring these places where she lived in some kind of manner. It's not 100% accurate, or it's not 100% like being there or anything like that, but it's close enough to give you a real sense. And to me, this is the real value of VR at the moment. It's not like being in these different places 100% or anything like that, but it gives you a better and more real understanding of being in these places than just looking at it on a 2D screen. I think that's why this experience really stood out to me. I think it's fantastic. Highly recommended.
Perfect. And Chris, you also did not vote for Spheres. How dare you? You voted for Tales of Wedding VR, and I have to admit that is not a game or an experience. It's a non-game that I had even heard of. So I'm very curious, and I'm also curious. I know you have a girlfriend, and you're getting close to the end of your collegiate career here. So are you thinking of popping the big question because you voted for Tales of Wedding VR?
It's unrelated to that, but I think this game is by Square Enix, and they always do a good job. Like when you know a game is Square Enix, it's going to have really high production value. And the reason I chose this over something like Spheres, I think Spheres probably should still be the overall. Like it really is a good experience. But Tales of Wedding Rings VR has such good production value and such good animations, and the world is really cool. Basically, it puts you in, like, imagine being put into a comic strip, and like you can see the border of the comic strip and you can look right in it, and everything's 3D, and it's really well done. I don't know how to describe it. I don't think any of you guys have ever tried this thing, but it's a little expensive, to be honest, but I got to try it for free at a place, which was helped. But it's just so well done, and it's really impressive to kind of see what film could be like in VR. I feel like this is the closest thing I've ever seen to a cartoon feeling real, and like just of having a story in VR. It's hard to really explain this in a good way, and the actual story behind it after this VR game ends literally just turns into like a very X-rated, really stupid thing. But if you just play the experience and don't have to look at any of the other lore, I think it's like a really well done experience that has to be tried out for sure. So that's why I picked it.
Very good. So I have to apologize for putting you on the spot with that question. I thought it would be some light humor, and now chat is running away with it. Everyone's telling you congrats for getting engaged. And so to be clear, Chris has not gotten engaged. I just kind of threw that up there due to the title of the experience that he chose.
Unless there's something you want to announce now, Chris. I don't know if you want to do it live on VR.
Not yet.
All right. He's sticking to his guns. The next one we are going to discuss is for best mobile game. Now, in years past, this was also another point of contention between me and Anthony, but in years past, we always did best PlayStation game, best Vive game, best Oculus game, and that sort of has gotten a little murky in the sense that it's hard to have a best Oculus game because then you have to exclude stuff on Steam. But one of the lines we are drawing is best mobile game. And I feel mobile is separate enough and different enough of the type of hardware platform on its own, at least for the time being, until Oculus Quest comes out next year. So best mobile game this year that we chose, not a majority, but it goes to They Suspect Nothing. Gary, I know you voted They Suspect Nothing, so I'm going to send it to you. Talk about this game and why it was the best mobile VR game you played.
Yeah, this was actually a pretty tough one because when I was thinking about this, I was playing all these games on my Oculus Go, and there's so many fantastic games. I can think of Kin, I can think of Ultra Wings, and all of these incredible games. And then you realize, well, that's not mobile only. So I've got to pick a title which is literally only a mobile. And They Suspect Nothing was the one that just stood out to me because when I first got my Oculus Go, it was one of the first titles I played and one of the first ones that really impressed me. So it's sort of like a series of mini games in the way these things are. It's very, it's very sort of kind of like a mobile game, I suppose, really in VR. But it does a good job, and it's not an easy category for me to talk too much about because it's not like I was bowled over or wildly in love with They Suspect Nothing or anything like that. This is just the title that first stood out to me, and one that Anthony put down as his nomination could equally be in there as well, but I'll leave that for Anthony to discuss as well. It's a great title anyway for people that want to pick this up. It's just not something that I'm like hugely passionate about, I've got to be honest, but I think it's a good title nevertheless.
Yeah, I also picked They Suspect Nothing. It was sort of a tight race for me between this and B Team. And what I liked, in both They Suspect Nothing and B Team sort of did a similar thing. But what I liked about They Suspect Nothing is really it was sort of like, it reminded me a lot of Valve's The Lab. Not that the mechanics were the same, but what they did was the developer clearly sort of just come up with a bunch of these types of small experiences and tech demos really that worked on the Oculus Go with the 3 Degrees of Freedom controller, and then they took those individual type of thoughts or experiments and they wrapped them together in this game that had a I hate to say narrative, but it was just tied together within a world and with purpose that kind of made sense for you to go into all these different hubs and play all these little individual experiences. So I thought it was good for that, and one of the better mobile games I played this year. Anthony or Chris, do either of you want to jump in here and talk about anything mobile?
I'll quickly just say I chose Eclipse Edge of Light as my choice, but to be completely honest, I'm like totally unqualified to do this category because I just haven't played enough of these games. But I chose Eclipse Edge of Light because it felt like you could almost like close your eyes a little bit and pretend you're in like a real Oculus Rift game for a second there. So that's kind of why I chose that one. But other than that, not really qualified.
I feel like you guys convinced me because I originally put down Covert, and Covert is a good mobile game in its own right, but I think you guys are right that They Suspect Nothing just has the perfect mix of demonstrating the technology and having the good graphics and having some kind of funny narrative. It's just like a really good thing you can jump into at any time, and I feel like it's one of the best examples of an Oculus Go game. So
you saw it here live, folks. We had our first change on the fly, so now They Suspect Nothing has become a majority vote for best mobile game. Moving on, our next to mention is our number 4 overall game, getting it queued up here. And that goes to, it's no surprise that this is in the list, to be honest, but it may be a little bit of surprise that it's this far down in the list. And our number 4 goes to none other than Beat Saber. I'm going to send it to Gary because we all know that it was his number 1 overall game. Like, spoiler alert, like Gary's number 1 game was Beat Saber. So let's send it to Gary. Gary, talk about Beat Saber and how did it even make our top overall list, since you despise it?
don't despise it. Yeah. So yeah, Beat Saber is our number 4. Okay. Next, who's next? Who wants to talk about Beat Saber?
Okay, very fair.
No,
Anthony.
no. Just quickly. Yeah, I can't argue with it. And I mentioned a few minutes ago about how this is really a recommendation. I see this show as an overall recommendation list. And although on a personal level, I'd never choose to play Beat Saber here in my office on my own. I can see it in context. I played it with my family on PSVR in the living room last week, and we had a great time in there. I can see it in a party context. But as a recommendation overall in VR, then it definitely belongs on a recommendation list without a doubt. And I also want to acknowledge just overall what it's done for VR. It's got so much coverage in mainstream games media. There's no way I can argue with this game being on here. Yeah, it's a good game. It does what it does really well. It's a great rhythm game. It's just doesn't appeal to me, unfortunately.
Okay, Anthony, you got anything to say about Beat Saber?
Yeah, I mean, this is the game that made me cry, right? No, but seriously, this was a game where they just put it together perfectly. Like sometimes I think about all these different developers out there that make all these different VR games are coming out. And what's the difference between some random VR game and Beat Saber? These are both indie developers. I don't know that Beat Saber is doing anything technologically incredible, but it was the right game at the right time, and it was just done so well. It was just executed perfectly. And the very first time I got in there, I was playing the game and I got these like goosebump sensations because I was going through this game and it was just the music, the visuals, the little sound effects, maybe even the haptic feedback when you're hitting the things, just everything combined so flawlessly. If I was like a legitimate fan of rhythm action games, see, I'm not a fan either. I'm like Gary, I'm not a fan, but I gotta, you recognize incredible things when they come along. But if I was a real fan, it would probably be my like number 1 game, period.
Yep, very fair. Chris, I'm sure you played a ton of Beat Saber. Hell, I don't even know we even talk about it that much anymore in terms of us actually playing it. I know we talk about Beat Saber a lot just for the impact that it's had in the VR space. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, I love Beat Saber. I've really just continued to get into it and continued to have people getting into it. Everyone at my college last semester who got a VR headset or who had one would always just play Beat Saber, and we'd always talk about it at class. Be like, I'm playing Expert Plus now, guys. I'm great. Like, it's just that kind of game that is the closest thing we've had to like a viral game or like a system seller. I feel like this is the closest game that someone looks at it like that looks badass. Even outside of VR, you're like, wow, that looks badass. I want to do that. And there's some games that feel really badass in VR, but if you watch gameplay of them, they look kind of lame. But with this, like, you can tell kind of what you're gonna get, and it just really does deliver. And I think this dude did such a good job of polishing the heck out of one mechanic and getting it right. And not enough indie developers really do that, so that is definitely awesome. I've made 2 beat maps so far with the custom songs and all that, so it's fun. The modding community is really what makes this game, I think. Without that, it might not be as high on our list, or even I guess in the top 5. I feel like that's what sold it for me is just having the ability to play any song I want, pretty much, or make a song if it doesn't exist. So
good. Okay. So I'll give you, Chris, both you and Gary, you got a couple, your overall number 4 choices that, didn't make our top 5 list otherwise. So slight spoiler alert, but I'm going to send it to Gary first. Your number 4 overall game goes to a game brought up earlier, and that is Moss. Speak up, Moss. Why did it belong in the overall list, even though it was just short of making the cut?
There's a few games that I've played this past year that just stick out to me. I mean, and they were relatively close to the beginning of the year as well. So Brass Tactics is one of those that I definitely wanted to get in here because that blew me away. And also Moss is equally in that category. I think playing through that game, I played through it in just a couple of sit-ins, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic from start to finish. And up until that point, until sort of Astrobot came out, this was really sort of the kind of sit down gamepad game that I would choose to play on the PSVR, other than something like completely different, like Wipeout, for example. So Moss just did so many things right. It's so polished. The graphics are incredible. I think that the world that they create, it's not just that the graphics are good, they're so consistent. They create this really compelling world that you can look into. And obviously, it goes without saying, the animation on Quill herself is fantastic. The character that you get from just this small mouse that is just moving around, that you're controlling, and has this animation and this character and this personality, is so well done. Moss had to be mentioned at some point in this list, and I think that it definitely deserves a place in somewhere in our awards. It didn't win any particular prize, but I think we can all agree that Moss is one of the best games of the past year. It just, for some reason, it slipped by. It just slipped slightly out of our top 5, only because of the caliber of other games and other experiences that we played, unfortunately.
Okay. We have a little, seem to have lost some feed or something split up here. We'll let Skype fix itself. Maybe we lost Anthony. So we will move on. Chris, you picked, your number 4 choice went to Vox Machina or Vox Machina. I don't know the correct spelling necessarily.
I don't either. No one does.
Anyways, it didn't make our list. Talk to us about why you wanted Vox in the top list.
Yeah, man. Let's just call it Vox. That's easier. But I think Vox easily is in my top 5, simply just because it feels so right in VR, and there hasn't been really a good cockpit game that's came out this year, and I feel like this is one of the best, maybe if not the best, implementation of a cockpit game I've ever seen. Like, everything is physical. You're moving the dials, and you pick up the radio. You're like, all right, team, let's defeat the objective, and like everything is very visceral and very hand oriented, and it just makes really great use of the touch controllers, and it's also cross-platform completely, so works on Vive, mixed reality, even works on just regular flat gaming, as we call it. So I think just having a game like that where anyone can jump in and play together and play all these different missions is really fun and really powerful, and there's nothing that even comes close to giving you the feeling of being in a mech like this game does. So they really hit it out of the park with this one, I think. And when it got like a kind of officially released at Oculus Connect 5, I think it was a big deal. Like all my friends talk about this game as maybe one of the most immersive things that they've ever done in VR, and I'd agree with that. So that's why for me it deserves a place in the top 5.
Very much. Unfortunately, we only did a top 5. Like if we'd done a top 10. A, the show would be longer. Not sure everybody wants that. And B, Vox would have been in my top 10. Like, we're limited to list only 5. And sometimes, like, it's a little bit excruciating because you're like, no, I want that game to be in there, but it can't be in there. I can only do 5. And Vox was just right outside the cut for me. Moving on, our next one is all 4 of us majority, for the best use of VR mechanics. And, seems very easy, but that goes to Windlands 2. Anthony, I know you're pretty high on Windlands 2. Why was it the best use of VR mechanics?
Well, it's like when I think of Windlands 2, it's a magical game because you're in this world. And so you got this wide open world, and that's great and all. But the reason why I give it the best VR mechanics is when you shoot out your Spider-Man webs or whatever you want to call them, and you're grabbing these trees and bushes or, anything that happens to be green, right? After a while, you start to learn how to do this so well where you're practically like a ballerina or something. I mean, you're just going through this world so like you're just zoom, zoom, and you're flicking and you're flicking yourself up. And there's probably somebody out there that has made like a Windlands Let's Play where they just look like such a badass in terms of how they're just flying through the world so perfectly, because it's that feeling. Like Jet Island also has these things that you shoot out, but it's nowhere near the feeling. Now, Jet Island, it probably has better physics and it's like more realistic, and Windlands is probably totally unrealistic from a physics standpoint, but it just feels so fun to like blaze through a huge gigantic level, but you're moving at like hundreds of miles per hour, just flying through there. It's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. Like when it came to this category, Windlands 2 was really the only game I ever considered. There was something, I always focus on controls and I focus on immersion, I think from a different perspective than a lot of people. A lot of people think, I have to have two hands in order to be immersed in VR. I don't always feel that way. But an immersive game to me is one where, I sort of forget that I'm playing a game, or I sort of forget I'm in my room, and I truly, get lost, at least as far as lost as we can really be in a VR world. And I think Windlands did it one of the best this whole year. Like there was, the boss fights really stand out. Like, you feel like you're like a cross between, Superman and Legolas or something, like the way you just flying midair and, you just come off of a swing and you pull your bow back and you got to hit the little red weak spot on one of the bosses. Like that just had a very immersive feeling, and it tied, everything that is good about VR together without bringing in, some of the bad things of VR. So I thought it was great. Gary, talk about Windlands.
I agree with what you've both said there. And just a couple of points I wanted to touch on is really what you've both touched on already is just this game makes you feel pretty good when you're playing it. It just feels great to play. It's hard enough. It's got to be hard enough for these developers to make it a good and compelling world, a good and compelling game that you want to play through anyway, but also to make it feel as good as Windlands 2 does. And what you were saying there, Steve, about how you can do this huge swing, and yet at the same time you can, while in midair, you can pull your bow and arrow back and then shoot an enemy, land, or even swing a little bit further and repeat the process again and again. It makes you feel good when you complete these little things. It makes you feel really good. And in terms of this award, so this is the best use of VR mechanics. We're still at a relatively early stage in VR where we've got these touch controllers or Vive ones, and as good as they are, they're not perfect. And to get a game feeling as good as Windlands 2 does with these relatively rudimentary controls, I think is an achievement in itself. I absolutely adore Windlands, and I think it needed to be on this list somewhere, and I'm glad it got this. It's a no-brainer for me again, this award.
Yep. Chris, I'm sure you're high on Windlands too. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, of course. It's great. It's such a good game. And similar, or I guess kind of unlike some of the other games in our list, this has like really good multiplayer support too. And it, you can just play through the game with your friends, and that's just the coolest thing to me. Like that I haven't had the chance to do that yet because none of my friends have Windlands 2 yet. But whenever any of them pick that up, I know I can swing in there and we can defeat bosses together. And it's just, as you guys all said, it feels so good and so natural, and just that feeling of pulling out the bow while you're in midair, like nothing beats like feeling like this. Probably makes you feel like a superhero, like most out of any game I've played. So it definitely deserves this award.
Perfect. Our next one, before we get into our next one, just want to do a thank you super chat update to John Barto and Oli Caleb, for the super chats that they've given us in the last, 20, 30 minutes or so. Our next category is best multiplayer. It was not a full panel consensus, but the somewhat majority goes to Echo Combat. I remember when, I think it was the first beta, for Echo Combat came out earlier this year. I just distinctly remember being behind the swan, the completely random for no purpose swan, that you have to navigate in this game. And, I had, some good conversation. Now, multiplayer, an experience in multiplayer can almost be circumstantial. Like if you land in a game with some good people that are playing the game, they can make your experience better. And likewise, if you play a game and the people you're playing with aren't doing well, they can actually bring down your experience of the game. And, I think I had such a good experience with the people I was playing with in the Echo Combat beta that it maybe elevates this game to the top of my multiplayer list. Like the way we were communicating and the way we planned, we just dominated for like 6 straight matches. And we didn't just win. Like because of our communication, we had the other team pinned down in the room where they launch, and they couldn't even get out of that very first room, like much less make it like get the swan halfway across. And I think because of that, the capability, the ceiling of this game is really, really high in terms of the multiplayer aspect. So, Gary, what are your thoughts towards this?
Yeah, I didn't have this as my choice, but this was the first one I went to when I first thought of this award. This is the game that I first went to. Again, like you, I played the beta of this, and it blew me away as somebody that doesn't play a lot of multiplayer games these days. How intuitive everything was, how good everything felt. The thing about this as well, it's like Lone Echo 2, I hope Lone Echo 2 has some kind of combat in it, hopefully, because just the action of activating your gun in this game, it just feels good. You're this robot and the gun sort of materializes out of your hand transforms, and then you've got a gun in there. It just feels so good. The gameplay itself, I had a great time in there. A lot of these games, these multiplayer games, I feel like I'm sort of holding people back. I'm not quite good enough and that kind of stuff. But with this particular one, because it was the beta, everyone was at sort of a base level. I sort of held my own, and we had a great time in there when I played it. So I can't argue with this winning the award. I chose Brass Tactics just because I had a little bit more fun in there as a multiplayer game, but very personal choice, that one for me. But yeah, pleased Echo Combat won this.
Okay. Anthony, do you want to talk about Echo Combat?
Yeah. I mean, real quick, I'll just say, like, for me, it's the presentation and everything. Like, one of the problems that we have in VR, my kids aren't into VR yet. And I think part of the problem is all they want to play is multiplayer stuff. And when you get into a lot of multiplayer games, like in the flat world, you've got like matchmaking and all this stuff that kind of goes on behind the scenes. And I think a lot of the multiplayer games that we have right now, like the matchmaking might not be very good, or maybe there's just not enough people that are in there for matchmaking to actually work. And I think in the case of Echo Combat, that's where it's all dialed in. That's where it's perfect. And there's just like, they just do all that so well, like the lobby, like everything, you can kind of like meet up in the lobby, and just the way they handle everything. It's just done so well. I'm not really qualified to be talking about what the best multiplayer is, but that one has the best polish and overall feel for me.
Alrighty. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I chose Vox Machina again, but I think it's a no-brainer that Echo Combat is a really good game, really well polished, and all the Echo games are just fantastic. So I totally agree with you guys that it could win that.
Alrighty. Apologies for the technical issues we're having here time to time. It seems like Skype wants to keep kicking people out, so blame Microsoft. Don't blame us. Our next one is very interesting. It is for best third person, and it's the only nomination award that we have where we had a perfect 2-2 split. So, it had to be a tie, and it is best third person game, and it goes to both Astrobot and Hellblade. I don't know who to send it to, so I'll just go to you, Gary. I don't know who picked what. I just know it was a 2-2 tie. So, what did you pick, and why do you pick it over the other?
I think Steve, you and I chose Hellblade, and Chris and Anthony chose Astrobot. And honestly, it's almost like semantics with the reason why I chose Hellblade over Astrobot, and it's only because I was sort of trying to get some kind of disclaimer where I couldn't pick Astrobot for this category because I wanted to include Hellblade at some point in this list. And Astrobot, you do have a physical presence in that game. Although it's still, I mean, I'd agree with what everybody else is saying. It is a third-person game, really. It's not. There's no point in arguing it. But I chose Hellblade in this particular category because I wanted to give it a mention. We speak about, and I think we're going to speak about Borderlands 2, for example, a little bit later on, but about these developers that are converting their games over to VR and how that can only be a good thing. And I agree with that overall. And in this case, Hellblade, they did a great job of transferring this flat game, this standard desktop PC and console game over to VR and giving you a really great VR experience. And it is sort of a pure third person game translated over to VR. really enjoyed playing Hellblade. You know, if we wanted to argue about it, of the two games, Astrobot or Hellblade, I'd always go towards Astrobot, but I wanted to quickly mention Hellblade anyway.
Yeah, I'm in the camp. I chose Hellblade, and to be clear, I think someone in chat said platformer and third person aren't the same. We're not saying so. We're saying purely third person, and Astrobot I would qualify as a third person game, but I chose Hellblade here, not because I was trying to necessarily elevate Hellblade or in a way drum down Astrobot, you know, to keep it from winning too much. But I legitimately think that in thinking of third person mechanics exclusively, I think Hellblade did a better job. Just a subtle nuance. If you notice, the way Senua will look the way you're facing. She'll turn her head to kind of mirror your head a little bit. When you're solving some of the environmental puzzles, like the way it actually pulls in some of that third person's perspective as they tied it to VR, required a little more thought rather than an Astrobot where it was just you're just looking at the bot, in the third person perspective. So, I do think Hellblade is a better choice here. But again, like, these are both really, really good games to me. So you can't be mad either way. But, there was a method to my madness as to why I thought Hellblade was the choice. Anthony, why is Astrobot the choice?
Well, okay. So both of these games are incredible and, we don't need to worry about that. But one of the things I will say, though, is like when you're doing this and when you're doing like best horror, best strategy, best, you're doing all these different categories, right? There is a tendency you don't want to have the same game keep showing up in all these, like it seems wrong to have the same game showing up over and over again. Although, like, let's say that Astrobot was your favorite VR game, period. If it's your favorite VR game, period, and it fits into third-person games, it fits into platformer games, I mean, shouldn't it be in all of those? Technically, it should probably win all the categories that it fits in, right? So for me, like, I could have put Hellblade here, and I kind of had like, I felt like I wanted to put Hellblade here just to give it some kind of recognition, but then I thought, no, let me stick to the strip here. I rank Astrobot better than Hellblade, and Astrobot is a third-person game, so I put it there. But we're splitting hairs, really.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that mindset. I tried to focus just on what makes something third-person or not, but yeah, both are completely valid. Chris, do you have anything you want to add here?
I mean, not really. They're both really good games, and I haven't had too much experience with either of them. So I figured, I think Astrobot has been kind of more of a bigger game, and I felt that just because it ranks overall higher, that I would put it there, kind of like what Anthony said. So,
alrighty. Our next is our overall number 3. And I think I was a little bit surprised, before we did our rankings. I wasn't sure where this game would sit, but, and we've discussed it already today. But nevertheless, I think it's very valid that it also sits here. But our overall number 3 goes to Brass Tactics. Now we've talked about the game, quite a bit, so, I don't know if we need to fully elaborate on everything else again, but, Chris, I'll send it right back to you. You were clapping.
Yeah.
Why does this belong specifically in the overall list?
I think overall, just thinking of the whole year, thinking of what games I'd want to play over and over again, Brass Tactics I'll always come back to, and because of how well it feels in the multiplayer aspect and the single player aspect, everything just came together to make a really kind of unique game that, uses VR so well, and the genre fits so well in VR. So I think there's a lot of innovation in this title, and just overall very, very good. So that's why I feel like, as I was clapping, I'm so excited. I love this game. I got to play it more.
Alrighty. Anthony or Gary, do you guys anything you want to add to Brass Tactics since we've covered it a fair amount yet, or?
Yeah, no, not too much from me. I think we've said it all with Brass Tactics. It deserves to be on the list. One of my favorite games, without a doubt, this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to send it to Anthony now because his number 3 pick that, the game that he chose for number 3 did not make our overall cut, so we want to give him the opportunity to talk this game up, and that goes to Pixel Ripped. Anthony, why is Pixel Ripped your number 3 overall game?
Yeah, so man, I mean, Pixel Ripped, really what it is the production value this is an indie studio, I guess you would have to say, but damn, when you play this game, like the sound effects, the little special effects that they do, so many times we play these VR games and we have to deal with a lot of jank. Like you'll be playing a VR game and things are working well, but then your vision gets screwed, like something weird happens and you're waiting for a couple of seconds and then it corrects itself and then you're back into the VR game. But we have to deal with a ton of jank, and it really kind of ruins part of the experience. And when I played Pixel Rip 1989, like there's no jank for me. Like everything just moves into like the menu, everything, all the little sound effects. Like I remember playing Pixel Rip 1989, especially on the Oculus Rift, because I played this both on PSVR and on the Rift. And on the Rift, the visuals are even better. And there's moments where, like, you have this Gear Kid or whatever they call it, which is kind of like a Game Boy that you're playing throughout this game. And there's moments in the game where it's like, it's like this gigantic Gear Kid that is huge and it's just moving towards you like a spaceship and it's just right in front of you and everything just looks so perfect. The only reason I think Pixel Rip 1989 doesn't get as much credit as it deserves is it is this nostalgic play. And so if I was like a 28-year-old dude, I have no nostalgia for Game Boy or anything like this, so I wouldn't really understand Pixel Ripped. And then also, when you're playing it, you're playing a lot of a Game Boy game. Like throughout the game, you're playing Game Boy. You're in another world, and you're playing the Game Boy within that other world, and certain things happen, but you're playing a Game Boy game for a lot of it. And I could see how people would be turned off by that. But that Game Boy game that you're playing, it sometimes leaks out into this virtual world that you're in, and then other times you're inside the Game Boy world, and all the music and just all the little graphics and like the green colors and then how it goes zzz, and you get raised up out into the real world, just all the production value. I really feel like Pixel Rip 1989 is one of the most underrated, incredible games of 2018. I absolutely love it. I cannot wait to see what these guys do next. And I hope what they do next, see the best individual parts of Pixel Ripped is when the retro thing leaks into the real world and you're playing like this retro game, but in a much bigger way. And I would love to see them just make a game that just does that. Oh man, I would love that.
Alrighty. Our next title, or our next genre, I don't know why I keep screwing that up. Our next genre is for Best Cockpit Game. Now, I believe, memory being jogged, that in one of the years past, we renamed this to Cockpit Game because I think we originally called it Racing Game or something like that. So, in my mind, and I don't know if the three of you all did the same thing, but the Cockpit Game sort of includes basically anything in a cockpit. So whether it be racing or a mech style game, hint, hint, Vox, or a flying game of some sort, like Elite Dangerous or something. So that's what at least I had in mind for Cockpit Game. And no surprise, really. We've already talked about it, but it goes to Wipeout. Wipeout has a cockpit, and I think it's the best one. So, does anybody want to jump in here? Chris, I'm not sure. I don't have everyone's list in front of me. Did you pick Vox here again? So, I think you got to get some time with Wipeout. I'd be interested in your thoughts once you get your PSVR, and get more exposure to it if you choose Wipeout over Vox. But, does anybody want to add anything?
Not too much. No, I think we've already discussed Wipeout anyway. It's the best cockpit. Because we have these lists down, and Chris got his in very early for this category of Vox Machina, and I almost put that down too. And then I thought, I'm going to add a category into this list for racing game, but then I remembered what you were speaking about there earlier, Steve, about how basically we were sort of amalgamating anything within a cockpit into this category. So I think it had to be Wipeout for me. I do want to just quickly acknowledge, because Chris has put Vox Machina a few times on his list, and I agree. I've not mentioned this, but I really do love that game too. It's a very close second. I would put a very close second in this category as well. So I'd be, there's no reason not to have that, but Wipeout was just blew me away.
Yep, that's kind of where I'm at. Okay, our next one, a little bit of controversy. Anthony's going to pull his hair out, but our next one goes to Best RPG. And it was a year where it was relatively light on RPGs, I think. But we chose Skyrim VR, and I guess in parentheses PC VR, because of course we had it on PlayStation VR last year. I'm torn on whether or not it should have been included, but nevertheless I cast my vote for it because Skyrim VR on PC was such a big step up from the PlayStation VR version, and it's not to necessarily knock the PlayStation VR version. I think they did as well as they could. On that hardware and with those limited motion controllers with no analog interface. So Skyrim VR on PC, when it came out, you have to kind of understand that like Fallout 4 was running like trash or had been running like trash. And then Skyrim was this sort of 180 from Fallout 4. It looked so clean and it ran so smooth that for a lot of people, they played a ton of it, and it's almost like a different game compared to the PlayStation VR version. I know it's Skyrim, and I know it's the same world, and all that, but it's just something because it performed so well and played so well and was so moddable that I don't think anybody was expecting that when it came to PC VR. So, Gary, I'm going to send it back to you. This is really the only time, spoiler alert, I think that we're going to bring up Skyrim. So, anything you want to throw in here?
No, only again, I don't want to keep excusing the list that we've got here, but again, this was a game, most of our audience, and I don't know this for sure, but I assume most of our audience are sort of PC-based VR. I know we've got people that watch our show that are also PSVR exclusive as well. But the reason I wanted to include this is because this is a game that came out on PC this past year, and it is without a doubt one of my favorite VR experiences ever. So it felt a little bit like, again, I could have gone either way on it, including it or not. I wasn't like too invested in absolutely getting it in here, but I would have been a little bit disappointed not to include it in this category. And I wasn't going to push it too far. I wasn't going to put this in my top 5 category or anything like that. I don't think it's fair to do that because of the fact that it is a re-release, a port over from the PSVR version. But at the same time, I think it's good to acknowledge it in this category because it was either going to be Skyrim VR is the best RPG this year or not have the best RPG this year, at least from my point of view. I just didn't have anything else there. But again, just quickly, like you mentioned there, Steve, what you alluded to, the step up from the PSVR version is quite significant when playing with the touch controllers or the Vive ones. It's just having that absolutely pin perfect one-to-one motion of hand movements and hand presence within that world makes all the difference. And also the clarity, having the ability to super sample this game even further than it already is, just makes the world of difference. Nothing wrong with the PSVR version at all. If you're playing that version, there's nothing wrong with it, and I enjoyed my time in there. It's just that if you do have the ability to play this on PC, I think it's the preferable way to do it.
I feel like it's almost a different game. Like I was enjoying the hell out of it on PlayStation VR last November, but when I got it on PC VR, it just felt like I preferred it on PlayStation VR with a DualShock. Like I didn't even like using the Move controllers. I don't like them for this type of game. And when I got it on PC VR and was playing it on my Rift and I played it some since on my Odyssey, it's like it's such a night and day difference. Yes, it's the same game, but it's just the feeling. Everything's just so different about it. So, Anthony, do you want to say anything? You want to tell us we're crazy or anything to add here?
No, I mean, no one's crazy for picking Skyrim. It's just, it was in the running last year on our show last year. It was one of the nominees of last year. And so I just have this, this like technicality, like you can't have a game nominated. Like what year does it belong to? I just feel like it belongs to 2017. But I know it's not, it's not ideal because there are people that got it on the PC. Dude, there's people that are living in this game on the PC with hundreds of mods. I know some personally where all they play is Skyrim VR since it's come out. I believe it came out in early April, right? And pretty much ever since then, they've just been living in this game, adding so many mods, doing so many cool things with the game. And for me, it scares me to death. I've stayed away from it because I have to play all kinds of games daily, and I can't have a game that just sucks my life away. And that's why I'm scared of it. So I've kind of just stayed away from it. But no, I totally understand why. And honestly, it probably should be in a lot of people's like top fives and stuff. But I've just said, no, this is a 2017 game just for me personally.
Leave it to Bethesda to release the same game every year. We always talk about it.
Screwing with Anthony's OCD, that damn Bethesda.
No.
Okay. You want to say anything about Skyrim specifically, Chris? Because I know you were into it too.
Oh yeah, it was really good on the PC because I didn't have a PSVR at the time, and I'm about to get a PSVR, which I'm really excited about. But compared to Fallout, it's just like you said, a complete 180. Like this thing just worked kind of out of the box, and there was no real performance problems. I could just jump in and enjoy it, which I think just makes it that much better. And it is a giant open world game that we haven't ever had in VR, so clearly It's the best RPG.
Yep. Alrighty. Moving on. Our next one is I don't think we always have this because we don't always get a good one each year. But this year it was for best tool, and it's a tool that I picked up a little bit late. And I know I've talked a couple of you guys into getting it, but our best tool / application / utility goes to FPS VR. This thing's like $2.99 or something like that. It's just a few bucks. It's less than a cup of coffee from Starbucks. And what it is, if you haven't seen it, it works only when you're running Steam VR. It doesn't mean you have to have a Vive. It works in the Odyssey, works in the Oculus Rift, but it's only when you're running Steam VR. It will not work when you're running a native Oculus game or something like that. But it just adds a graphical interface to the underside of one of your controllers. So if you're playing a game and you don't want a permanent HUD, mounted in the view of your world, who would want that? But you occasionally want to check in on your frame timing or your GPU timing or CPU timing. You can just flip to the underside of your left hand, and I'm assuming you can move it to the right hand if you wanted to move it over there, and you just have that information available to you on the fly. And for the amount of value that it's given me, when testing different headsets and testing different super sampling settings and stuff like that, it's a no-brainer for the PC tinkerer, PC VR tinkerer. It's a no-brainer. Everyone should have this if you ever get in and like fumbling around with settings or anything. Gary, I know you've picked it up. Was it a question? Was there anything else out there to even be considered? And if so, would it have offered more value than FPS VR?
The only other thing that springs to mind, I don't know, we've not spoke about it on the show, is virtual desktop on the Oculus Go. Did we speak about that last week?
We did speak
into that actually, yeah. But yeah, that is the only other thing. I wanted to talk about FPS VR though, because I got this on your recommendation, and as you mentioned, as a tinkerer, as somebody that really wants to dial in their experience on PC-based VR, and again, going back to like Skyrim VR, for example, or Fallout 4, you have sort of on-the-fly adjustment where you can adjust super sampling and immediately get an idea of what is going on in terms of the frame rate that you're getting, where the load is on GPU or CPU, and what you need to adjust. And it's always a little bit like at the back of my mind, before I got this, it's at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, am I actually getting the best experience I can get out of my PC on any given game? Now I know whether I am or not, because I know if I'm sort of jumping over, I'm dropping down below 90 frames per second at the drop of a hat. It's very non-invasive, this application as well. It's very lightweight. It's very non-invasive. It literally just sits on the bottom of your controller. You can check it out at any time. There's no hassle with it, and I think it's definitely worthwhile. Other than this, virtual desktop on the Oculus Go would have been the only other option for me. Okay.
Chris, Anthony, I don't think you guys put something down for this category. Maybe I'm wrong. Want to jump in with anything?
No, I think you mentioned everything about FPS VR. I think it's a great tool.
Yeah, it sounds good. I don't know, all the tinkering and stuff. It's kind of nice just to have a PlayStation VR. You just turn the thing on and you play it, But I understand. It's good to have that, and I'll probably need something like that when I rebuild my PC, which I'm going to be doing this next week.
Yep. Oh, cool. Okay, our next one. So we did not have a consensus. Like it was just completely not together on the pick for 3D audio. And I think it's probably the first time we've had that happen. So I'll put down a couple picks between Anthony and I. Anthony picked Firewall 0 Hour for the best 3D audio. So I'm going to send it to him just to kind of talk about why he picked that, since we don't have a team consensus pick.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to For Willin for Fun and also Fluke for contributions to our super chat. Thanks so much for that. But yeah, in regards to like Firewall 0 Hour, in regards to this topic of best 3D audio, here's the problem. It's hard to remember what the best 3D audio is. Like if somebody says, what is the best graphics? You have all these different games that pop into your mind. If somebody says, what's the best 3D audio? You're like, damn, that's a good question. I really don't know. But there's a few games that do stand out to me. My pick is definitely Firewall 0 Hour, but another one I'll also mention really quick is Moss. Because you know when you get to that one stage in Moss where these guys are like throwing these fireballs or they're shooting these fireballs at you, it was very 3D when those fireballs are landing over here and the fireballs are landing over here. You really feel like you are in a 3D audio space. That was really good with Moss. But Firewall takes the cake for me because I was in Firewall. I was playing it with my aim controller. I'm standing here. I got everything on. I'm playing Firewall. It's all good. Somebody opened a door behind me and started shooting or something. And it freaked the living crap out of me. Not because I'm in a game and it was like scary or something. It was the audio. The audio was so natural and so real. I thought someone was in my room. Like I thought somebody came into my little man cave here. That it freaked me out that much. I really think the 3D audio on Firewall 0 Hour is absolutely fantastic.
Cool. My pick went to, and honestly, someone mentioned whether or not this game has 3D audio in chat. I think Paradise Decay brought it up. My pick goes to Hellblade. And I don't know that I didn't really pay attention to the technicality, if it's just binaural audio or 3D audio. It's the audio where I'm including it. Hellblade was done, and if you watch the making of video that they had out there with Hellblade, they actually set up this binaural microphone that actually resides like in a prosthetic human ear. And they had all the female actors that do the whispering in Hellblade, and they had them standing around these prosthetic ears with the microphones in them to record the whispering. And to me, like, that was a runaway choice for the best use of 3D audio, like both from a technical perspective, but also for what that audio meant in game. Like when you're playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, the big part of the narrative and everything of it is that she is battling these mental demons in her head, and she's hearing these voices, and they're whispering different things from all different angles. And some whispers are louder than others. Some whispers are softer than others. And, it was such a key focal point of this game as a whole. To not include it would, in my mind, be wrong. So I included it. I think it is pretty much the runaway best 3D audio, but, everybody has their opinions. So, moving on. Our next one goes to best graphics, and shooting myself in the foot here because we initially did our casting for the votes. We all landed on Transference, I believe. And Transference is a fine looking game, and it's what gets our award. But afterwards, and after it was too late to really go back and change, I remembered Primordian. So I think, if I could change my vote in retrospect, it might go to Primordian. But nevertheless, officially, we have settled on Transference. So, Chris, I'll send it to you to talk about the graphics in Transference.
Yeah, sure. I think, the graphics in this game are kind of unique because they have that really cool glitchy aspect to them. And, no game has really done that before in VR. And I think it came across really well. And just having a studio like Ubisoft, work on a VR game, they really know how to nail the graphics, and it shows. Like all the graphics were very consistent, all very high quality, and that's to me why I put it for best graphics. But it's kind of hard because graphics have just been around the board getting better, like across the board. We're really lucky with some good graphics in games, so it could really go to a number of things. That's just kind of what popped into my head when I thought of a game with really high quality graphics.
Yep. Gary, what do you think about transference as it relates to graphics? And I'll go ahead and add, I think maybe it was Anthony that brought this up offline, but there's a way a game looks in terms of resolution. Does it super sample well, or there's the textures, but then there's also special effects, and I think that can kind of come into play when you talk about graphics.
That's true, yeah, and I take his point on that. Maybe Anthony can speak about that a little bit more on this particular game, but I agree. I think there's certain things that this game does. It looks great anyway, and because it's based in like a real, very sort of just a standard modern day home. I think it opens itself up to a little bit more scrutiny in terms of like how it looks, how it represents itself as a real home in VR, and I think it does a great job of doing that. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of things to explore, there's little things that you can see all around, just little objects that are placed everywhere. So yeah, as a graphical experience, it's fantastic. Not too much to add, honestly. There's a few titles that I could have gone to on this particular award, but I think this is well placed to win it. Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Anthony, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so my pick actually for best graphics, I forgot about this and I got confused a little bit. My pick for best graphics is actually Red Matter, but transference is way up there for me. Like when I think of best graphics, I think of Red Matter, transference, I think of like Primordian, even Astrobot, and so like all of these games are like some of the best graphics. Now in regards to transference, for me it really is the special effects. Like if you're just in the world, and it's also like the colors and the hues and kind of all of that, because like if you're in transference and you're just looking at a coffee cup or like a picture that's on the wall, like it might not necessarily blow you away. Like that graphics, I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is in the game, it's kind of like reality, but like fading in and out of reality. And it's kind of like this sci-fi thing. So like things are existing and then they're not existing and then they're existing. And it's just the special effects of that. Like they'll take the main character and like he's digitally standing there, but it's like, like little pieces of them are like drifting away, kind of Matrix style. And really it was the special effects there. But let me talk about what I feel is the best graphics, which is actually Red Matter. See, Red Matter, when I played that game, and great graphics, by the way, on PSVR, a true achievement on PSVR, right up there with Wipeout. But when I played this on my Oculus Rift, I had a 970 graphics card, and I felt like I had a 1080 Ti when I was in there. Everything was just so beautiful, so clear, so dialed in. There was no herky-jerky, no technical issues. It was rock solid. And it was really just the backgrounds and the environments, and then like picking things up and looking at them and examining them, picking up pictures or picking up things, holding things in your hand, or just like your actual controllers themselves. I just thought Red Matter did an absolutely fantastic job. And Primordian, that was like January, like best jungle of the year, best jungle of the year.
Yep. Okay, moving on. We are now to our overall number 2. And no surprise here. Maybe even people could guess it before I say it, but we're on a 30-second delay, so they're not going to have a chance. That goes to Windlands 2. Chris, we've talked about Windlands, so I think in the interest of boring people, we might want to not spend too long on it, but it's our number 2 game. Is there any argument against that? Isn't that what it should be?
That is what it should be. It really is, because another one of the games probably best polished, up there with Beat Saber in my opinion. Like it's just a really polished game, feels really well. It's everything that makes a VR game good and fun. The only thing I guess that could knock it for me is if someone get motion sick, like they'll get motion sick in this game. But I've had some friends be like, "Whoa!" But for anyone like us, the VR enthusiasts, I mean, this game is a must-have and a must-play.
Okay, Gary.
Yeah, not too much to add. I did want to just mention with Windlands 2, absolutely one of my favourite VR games of the year. The step up from Windlands, the original Windlands for me is quite significant because they have far more of like a narrative and like it's just something to pull you through that game. I fell off the original Windlands. I played a lot of it, but I fell off it because I didn't feel like there was any too much agency. And the fact that you've got NPCs to interact with, you've got these missions which feel far more well structured, and you have these boss fights at the end of most levels as well. It just makes for a more like a complete experience. So I'm really excited. Actually, part of the reason I wanted this in my top 5 this year is because I'm excited to see what this developer does next, and I'd love them to expand Windlands even more and give us even more than they've given us with this game. It's more like the potential of this game that I can see more than even where it is now, because I'm so pleased with what they did to step up their game between the first 2 games. What is Windlands 3 going to be like? I think it's going to be great.
Alrighty. Anthony, you want to add anything?
Yeah, first, a quick shout out to Jim Hall. Thanks so much for the super chat. And I also want to thank him for helping me with VR365 because he's helped me in the background. And I just owe like a ton of credit to Jim Hall. Thanks so much for all of that. As far as Windlands 2 is concerned, this is my game right now, man. It's like, if I could play any game I want to play in VR right now, it's Windlands 2 because it's the game that I'm running through right now. I have not finished it yet, and it is my game. And it goes back to like what Steve and Gary were talking about earlier in terms of the boss fights. The boss fights are so freaking epic because like get a flat gamer to play Windlands 2 and force them to play it for 3 hours where they're really going to play it and they're really going to experience a couple of different boss fights because they've never experienced a boss fight like this before. Yeah. You have this boss that is like over there, right? And you're going all around the boss as you're battling it. It's like you're in an action movie. You feel like you're in a movie when you're battling these bosses. And you zip yourself up into the air. Like this is what we all do, right? We zip ourselves as high into the air as we can. Then as we're flying through the air, we grab our bow, we go like this, and it is Legolas. You basically feel like a badass Legolas, and you go like this, and boom, you let your thing fly, and then you're falling down, and you're going to die, but at the last second, you shoot up one of your webs, and you grab one of those branches, and you yank yourself up again, and you do it again. Or sometimes the boss is shooting missiles at you, and you're just like, bam, bam, bam. You know, you're going to all these different trees, and you're flowing around the boss to get away from all the missiles that are being shot at you. And then it's also just, so that's one aspect of Windlands 2, but another aspect is just this chill, relaxing world that you're in, because sometimes you're just going through Windlands and you'll jump up somewhere and you'll fall down and you'll be like way down towards the ground. And there's like a river of lava that's flowing by. And there's all these little crevices and all these little areas that you walk through. And every once in a while, you'll find like these little collectibles. I kind of wish Rare worked with Cytex Games on this game and put 1 million more collectibles everywhere that you could find, because I love just kind of like, sometimes I just kick back in Windlands 2 and I'm like, I'm not even worried about what the plan is. I'm just exploring this cool little world that they made. And there's not a lot going on. I kind of wish there was more going on in all these little nooks and crannies, but man, I just think it's magnificent. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you say we should force a flat gamer to play it. I don't know. Like, if we force a flat gamer to play VR, Windlands might be a bad one due to the motion sickness. Like, they gotta have their legs first. But other than that, I completely agree with you. Alrighty, moving on. So, our next one, we're gonna make a decision, here live and on the fly because, we forgot to before we started recording, but we've always had a best shooter category, and we all put down that we're going to wait to play Borderlands 2 VR before making a decision, and then we never got together and made a decision. So I have 2 options queued up here, but let's just go around the table here real quick. And is Borderlands 2 your best shooter, or do you have another choice? So I'll start with you, Gary.
Hey, this is really tough this year. Honestly, I didn't know what to put in this category. I'm not going to choose Borderlands 2. I've not played enough of it. We only got it on Friday, and I've played around an hour and a half of it, a few missions. I've never played a Borderlands game before, and it's not blowing me away, unfortunately. I know there's some huge fans of Borderlands, so I don't enjoy saying that. And I'm going to persevere with it. The problem is, a lot of it goes back to the fact that the move controllers. I do want hand presence in this game. The move controllers are just not fit for purpose, unfortunately. So I'm playing Borderlands 2 quite a lot on DualShock, although I have gone back and forth. I've gone between move controllers and DualShock a little bit. And I think I'm sort of gravitating a little bit more towards DualShock, which is not really how I want to play the game. So I'm not going, even if this, this was a couple of weeks later and I played a little bit more, I don't want to just put Borderlands 2 in there, but I'm struggling. I am struggling for the games to put in this category. So I think, as it turns out, I am going to go with Firewall 0 Hour. And again, it's not an easy choice because being somebody that doesn't play too much multiplayer, I haven't played a huge amount of it, but I think the amount I have played was pretty impressive. And it's all the more impressive when you see what these developers have done on PSVR with the aim controller, which it's a disappointment that's not been included in the release of Borderlands 2, unfortunately. But then again, there's problems with that, isn't there? Because there's a lot of dual wielding in Borderlands 2, so I don't know how that would adapt to the aim controller. My thoughts on this are really mixed up. I don't know where to go on it, so I'll pass it over to somebody else.
No, that's perfectly fine. And I agree with you. I have played Borderlands 2 VR. I haven't put a ton of time into it. I haven't had the opportunity to put a ton of time into it. In fact, it only just came out 2 days ago. So who has? I've only played it with the Move controllers, and I want to play it with the DualShock. I have a feeling that I'm going to prefer it on PlayStation VR with the DualShock, and I have a feeling that if it comes, like we're speculating, if it comes to PlayStation VR next year, or I'm sorry, to PC VR next year, I have a feeling I'm going to prefer it on PC VR, and at that point, I'm going to want to use motion controllers and such, like the touch, or maybe I'll have Knuckles by then, or whatever. I have a feeling that it has a capability of making the same sort of jump that Skyrim made, because I can tell it's a good looking game. The actual cell shading and all this stuff, it looks good. It's running at a low resolution on the PlayStation VR, but I can tell, like, when it jumps to the cutscenes and it looks much sharper because it's just playing the flat cutscene. I can tell that it's going to look good when given the resolution headroom that you'll be able to get on PC VR. So I think that'll be the optimal way to play it. But in the effort of making a best shooter choice here live, I'm just going to copy off of you. I'm not necessarily good at coming up with all the games that came out this year that were shooter games, but Firewall was a game that I know I enjoyed a lot when it first came out, and of course, like Oh Woe Is Us, we get a lot of games, we have to talk a lot of games, so I had to somewhat move on from Firewall 0 Hour due to time constraints. But when I was playing it and put a lot into it, I enjoyed it quite a bit. So Firewall will be my choice. Anthony, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, okay, so just quickly about Borderlands 2 VR. One of the things I'll say is I'm super early in the game, just like the rest of you guys. And like early on in the game, I've only gotten like some basic handguns, and there will be enemies that are far away and you feel like you're just kind of shoot. And you don't really feel like you're like even aiming properly. So it's like, I almost need some better weapons and I haven't got to them yet. So I really can't, I can't even include Borderlands 2 VR in this discussion. The other thing I'll say is, I'm not really qualified for this category because shooters aren't really my games, but I'll mention some of them that have, like, we're thinking about 2018 here. Like some people I've seen Jan Odendahl mentioned Pavlov and Horseshoes, H3 VR and all of that. And so we're trying to think of 2018 games here. So that's part of it. But like, when you think of 2018 shooters, you got War Dust, you got Zero Killed, you got Zero Caliber, you got Contractors VR, you got Echo Combat. basically anything where you're primarily shooting a lot would pretty much qualify if it released in 2018. And I will say Firewall Zero Hour is my pick again, although I haven't, like you two guys as well, I haven't put a lot of time in Firewall Zero Hour, but when I was in it, everything worked smooth. Everything operated the way you'd want it to operate. There wasn't no real jank there. And so I will go with Firewall Zero Hour, but I'm not really qualified for shooters.
Yep, we got a few people in chat, Hybrid Energy, saying that we haven't played Contractors, and he's correct. I haven't played Contractors. I am playing another game that I can't really talk about, that maybe would have been in the running, but I can't talk about it, and I'll have a chance to talk about it and this time next year in our 2019 award show. Chris, anything you want to jump in? Do you want to throw a name out there for best shooter for you?
It was originally going to be Zero Caliber, because I did play a lot of that with my friends, and like it was, it's a good time. It's just so cool to have realistic guns in VR. But a bunch of games do that well. I think Contractors is the next step up from that. So I haven't actually personally tried Contractors, but I have a friend who's all into military sims, and he said it's a lot better than Zero Caliber. So just based on his judgment, I haven't tried it yet. I'd say that might be the best VR PC VR release this year. But I think it's still in beta actually, so it's not really technically released. But all these have jank, and I can just imagine having one without jank, and I can instantly would fall in love with that. So I agree with you guys. I can't wait to try this one out on the PSVR.
Okay, good. Our next game, our next category is always a fun one. It's a little bit cumbersome in the sense that it's not necessarily a positive one, but it's our most disappointing game of 2018. I have it here as a pretty big majority. I think 3 of us voted for this title, and that goes to none other than Marvel Powers United. Maybe it was a 4-way vote. I'm not sure. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but nevertheless, Marvel Powers United, in my opinion, is deserving as the most disappointing title, even if a little bit predictable. I think coming up into this game's release, we were kind of looking at it and saying, yeah, it's just going to be this weird wave shooter thing. And, we weren't expecting it to wow us, but there was so much money and marketing put behind it. Like, it still is disappointing to me that they didn't do better, because I think the underlying engine and the underlying, property, I mean, it's Marvel. Like, it's a great underlying property. I think it has a ton of potential. They didn't make the game itself very fun. It was just kind of this watered down. It felt like something that you would play at a Dave and Buster's while waiting on your wings or something to show up. Like, it just had this watered down feeling. Anthony, do you want to say anything about Marvel Powers United being a disappointing pick?
It's definitely a disappointing pick. For me, the biggest problem that it had is like you would get into these stages, and you know what? I know there's been some updates and stuff, and I probably should go back in there and revisit it. But the last time I played it, you get into these stages and they just go forever. Like, I think if they did nothing else but cut the time of the time, the time that you're in the stages, like let's say it takes 25 minutes to get through whatever stage. If all they did was just chop that time in half, I think it would be a much better game, because every time I got into it, I had some fun. Like, I was being Spider-Man at one point, and I was like grabbing the enemies and smashing them together and doing some stuff like that. And I love the Spider-Man arms. Like, I would look at my Spider-Man arms and I'm like, these look like really good Spider-Man arms in Technicolor as well. But the stages just went on and on and on. And I just eventually I quit out of this game multiple times without finishing the stage. Like, I didn't even wait for the stage to finish.
Yep. Chris, what's your take on how disappointed you were with Marvel Powers?
Yeah, it was a recipe for failure from the beginning, I think. Just the amount of marketing and everything behind this. Oculus was kind of marketing this as like the biggest VR game that they'd ever release, kind of thing. Like, it kind of had that level of hype behind it.
Well, they had the bundle. Like, I mean, off the top of my head, have they ever had a bundle for any one other specific title?
Exactly. Like, imagine if they had like a Beat Saber bundle or something. I feel like that would sell so much more riffs than this. But that just shows how much they were banking on this game, just due to the properties, and it really fell flat. Like going into the game, I was like, holy shit, this is an epic. Like when it was that intro scene where everything is like happening and you see all the heroes, like wow, I'm like, wow, this game's gonna be great. But like you guys said, when playing the actual game, it's just so underwhelming, and it's just a wave-based shooter basically. And I got to get back into it because I know there's been some updates, but there's nothing that makes me want to come back to this game. It was just underwhelming in every way. So I think it wins most disappointing by a lot, just especially because of the hype around it. There's no other game that's had this much marketing behind it. I don't think ever.
Yeah, I think everyone played this sort of the tutorial in the beginning where it was almost like a campaign game, and it was very guided, it was very easy, but it felt like it felt a little bit like a campaign. Like I just want that game. Like they got the textures, the voice acting, they got all that done. Just make me a campaign game that's like the tutorial, and I'll probably really like that more than I did this wave battler. Gary, Marvel Powers United was not your pick, so I'm going to send it to you. You can say anything you want to say about Marvel Powers United, then you can go ahead and reveal what you did pick as your most disappointing game.
Yeah, so Marvel Powers United, I didn't have a lot invested in this game anyway before it came out. I didn't expect to really get on with it too much. So that's why it really wasn't that disappointing. I don't think it's a great game. It's never really appealed to me anyway, so I wasn't really too excited for it overall. But the game that I've chosen is Budget Cuts, and it's not an easy choice, honestly, because I don't say that lightly, because I think there's still a lot to enjoy about Budget Cuts. I think it had a rough launch. There were various problems with the game. And I think it comes with so much expectation after that demo had so much excitement during the early days of VR, and people were building this game up, building it up. And when it came out, we all knew it really wasn't going to fulfill a lot of the expectations. And yet at the same time, I still expected it to be a bit more of a game that I wanted than it actually turned out to be. And I have this certain number of games that whenever I think about playing VR, and I've not got any pressure to play any one game or another that we're going to be discussing on the show, there's certain games that I just think about, I want to go in and play again. Wipeout on PSVR is one of them. Budget Cuts is another one. I do want to go back in there and really sort of delve into it a little bit more, see what updates they've done with this. But it wasn't the game I was expecting overall. Not to say that it's still not got some value. It was a bit of a disappointment when I was expecting so much from it. That's really why I chose it.
Hey, you know what? Real quick, I went into Budget Cuts like just the other day because I wanted to try it out now that I got a 1080 Ti, and see if it was better. And and it wasn't. Like it still had all the jank that I remember. And I'm wondering, will there be a day like when we have like a super high powered computer, is there going to be a day when I go into Budget Cuts and it's just going to work perfectly? Because that's when I want to play through the whole entire game then, because it just had a lot of jank.
I wonder, like the stuttering, because I think it's just inherent in the game. I think it's got to be CPU based, the stuttering, honestly.
Even the trailer I'm playing is stuttering. I'm not lying.
But
that's crazy.
The original demo that they had was flawless. And that's why, like, the original demo had none of that. Like, it worked absolutely perfectly. And so you're so used to that original Budget Cuts demo that everybody played. It's like, man, why can't they? I almost want them to go back to that engine, even though the robots look kind of goofy and stuff.
Yep. Okay, so just a little note there that Tetris VR wasn't included because I don't even consider it a VR game. So there's that. And then
got him.
And then everyone in chat is very pleased that Gary's most disappointing pick wasn't Beat Saber. Moving on, speaking of Beat Saber, it wins Best Rhythm Game. Surprise. Anybody? No one would have picked that one, right? We've talked about Beat Saber a lot this year and on this show. Does anybody really want to say anything about it getting Best Rhythm? Seems straightforward, right?
It seems straightforward. I don't think there's any other game that even came out that would make sense.
Well, there was some Hotel Transylvania plug-in rhythm game that actually didn't look half bad. I never played it. But it's still, I couldn't pick it over Beat Saber. Sight unseen. Again, I've never played it, and yet I'm willing to say I wouldn't pick it over Beat Saber.
Yeah.
Okay, and our next one is another one we can go quickly on. Is for best puzzler, we all picked Red Matter. Anybody want to jump in and say anything, or have we covered it to death already?
Yeah, I think so.
Fantastic game.
Yeah, it is a great game. There seems to be some different opinions on Red Matter, and I'm definitely of the camp that I think that this is one of the best games this past year, and it is a puzzle game. Again, I'll go back to the fact that it's an escape the room game, but initially I felt like the puzzles were really well done. Again, as I said earlier, I felt they maybe got a little bit too repetitive towards the end of the game, but still a fantastic game in a great environment. It really brings you into this world, and the puzzles are sort of a mix between environmental puzzles and just standard kind of things as well. Really well done.
Alrighty. And now our next one is best overachiever game. I don't know that we've always had this category out there, or if we just added it this year, but I like it. I like it as a category because there's always sort of that surprise hit that comes out of nowhere. And for us, this was a majority, and it all went to Pixel Ripped. Pixel Ripped caught me by surprise. I sort of had my eye on it, and I know there's a lot of marketing out there, the developer Anna, she dresses up as Dot and does a lot of PR and goes to a lot of shows and stuff. So this game was really on my radar. But when we got to play it, like it surprised me. So it was a game that was on my radar, but still also blew me away at the same time. Like it was, part of it is that nostalgia. I think Anthony mentioned earlier. Part of it's the execution. Even if you don't have that nostalgia, like what really clicked for me was, sort of at the end of each level when it goes into this expanded sort of AR type, mode to finish off the level. And I thought those scenes were all just like really, really executed well. So, for me, it was an easy pick for Overachiever Game of the Year. Chris, I'll send it to you next. Anything you want to add about Pixel Ripped in terms of it being an overachiever?
I guess just thinking about it, you wouldn't think to have a game where you're holding like a physical Game Boy or something. You wouldn't think about that as like a use of VR, but it just worked so well. And using the touch controllers, I could like move around the device, and like it's just something you would never think to do. I know I would never think to make a game like that. So the fact that these developers did that and it just worked so well, I think makes it an overachiever for me. Like really excellent job with that. Like who would have thought that would be something so fun?
Gary, anything you want to add about it being an overachiever?
Not too much, no. I haven't really spoke about Pixel Ripped on this episode so far, but I think it definitely deserves its place on this list. What a fantastic game! It's surprising, like the level of imagination and where you think you've seen. I've said this before when I spoke about this game, but where you think you've seen everything that the game has to offer, it opens up again, and you're presented with something else that you just simply didn't expect. So well done. Really pleased it got a mention on this show.
Absolutely. Okay, and we have now come to our number one overall game of the year, and that goes to our little buddy, no surprise, Astrobot. It's a bit predictable, and I wish that I could sit here and say, we have some surprise sleeper hit that no one was expecting, but that's not fair. That's not fair to Astrobot. That's not fair to Japan Studio. It's not fair to Sony. So, for me, there are very few shining moments that I'm a fan of VR. I've been a gamer my whole life. And there are these sequence, if I look back over the last 20 years or whatever, like there's sequences, there's little standout moments here and there that, just like really shine. And I think that I will remember, until the day I die. In VR, those moments have been, moments in Resident Evil 7, moments in Subnautica, moments in Lone Echo, and also moments in Astrobot. And, in particular for me, the level where it starts to go vertical, it's in one of maybe the first or second world, and you start, releasing some vines and some large plant trunks that start going vertical. I think it's the spot that is showing on the screen right now at the moment. And that's when Astrobot, like it was good, like it was great up to that point. But at that moment, it kind of transcended for me. It transcended past good and was doing something special at that point. It was the level design. It was the execution. It was all these things just coming together. And then that's not to mention the boss fights. The 5 boss fights are incredible. The use of scale, like the fidelity, it just looks really, really good on PlayStation. I think there was really no question for me that this was going to be the best game. Other than Subnautica. Subnautica is my number 1 overall, but in terms of it being, our number 1 best game, I think is very fitting. So, I'm going to send it to Gary. 'Cause I know you banged through this pretty quick, or did you not complete it? Maybe I'm misremembering.
No, yeah, I finished it within the first 4 days of owning it, I think. So played through it pretty quickly. Really enjoyed it. And again, I'll go back to the fact that I almost put this in a different category, a different sort of plane to a lot of VR games that I want. You see, part of me, the reason I got into VR in the first place is for games that offer me a certain thing that I expect from VR, placing me within a different world where I feel like I am completely immersed in this world and I can enjoy it. Games like Elite Dangerous, Skyrim, where I'm in an open world, I can explore them and that kind of stuff. And that's really what pulls me towards wanting to play VR and wanting to be in VR. Astrobot doesn't do any of that. And yet this is my number 1 game of this year. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. And yet at the same time, it's so well done that you can't deny the design that has gone into this game is impeccable. And I'll go back to a sentiment that I think has been mentioned time and time again regarding this game, is the fact that if this had a bigger IP associated with it, and I'm thinking specifically Mario obviously, then this would be not only sidelined in the mainstream games media as just one of the best VR games this year, it would be absolutely one of the best games this year in mainstream games media. And I think it's sort of an injustice that this game just gets sidelined in many publications. They acknowledge it, but they just don't really acknowledge it in the same way that they acknowledge a lot of other games. And I think that's unfair because I think it deserves a lot more than it's actually received, which is a lot. Incredible game. Definitely worth it. It's not fulfilling the expectations of what I want VR to do necessarily on the whole, but it's such a fantastic game. You can't not love it. You can't.
Yep. And I think, to be fair, I think this did get a fair amount of mainstream love. It did really well on Metacritic, and there were people who, people in the press and people, just out there in Twitter and all that don't normally comment on VR. And, they may comment, occasionally on a game like Beat Saber or a game like Astrobot. So it got, I'd say a fair amount of tension. And I think it probably, could have also been a candidate for an overachiever game. We were all, those of us that got a PlayStation VR in 2016 and played the little, one in the Playroom VR that Astrobot Rescue Mission is based off of, we'd all said, hey, we want a full game like that. But I think this overachieved. If I were to go back and play the VR Playroom version that has a little Astrobot in there, I don't think it would stand up to what Astrobot's Robots Rescue actually ended up being. It went way above and beyond what I thought it was going to be. And for me, I know to your point, Gary, you said that you don't, this is not exactly what you're looking for out of VR. I assume you're thinking of your virtualized presence, motion controllers, putting you in the game and all that. For me, this is doing I don't have, one or the other type preference. I want to be amazed and I want to be immersed and I just want to be lost in a world. And Astrobot did that. So, Anthony, let me send it to you to add any of your closing thoughts on Astrobot and our number 1 game.
Yeah, technically, I believe I had this as my number 3 game, but there was a part of me that was like, Astrobot should be number 1. And maybe it's part of what Gary talks about too, where when you do think about VR, you really do think about, boots on the ground, a sword in one hand, a shield in the other. You're completely surrounded by the world. In fact, Paradise Decay was talking about how he put a flat gamer into Skyrim VR for the first time, and the guy started crying because he couldn't believe he was actually in that world. And that's a great, that's the perfect example that we're looking for here. Astrobot is a third-person game. You're sitting down, you're using a regular controller. And so there's a lot of people that they immediately will write the game right off from that standpoint because they're like, oh, it's third person. Oh, you're sitting down with a controller. It's not a real VR game. But I challenge you again. I like forcing people to do things. And I believe if we could force everybody on planet Earth, or just every gamer or whatever, play like 2 worlds of Astrobot. Like, I don't know anybody in their right mind that could play 2 full worlds and beat 2 full bosses of Astrobot and walk away and say, nah, that's not that great. Like that person does not exist. If you've played Astrobot that long, you know how brilliant it is. Now, I'm sure there's a couple of people that played Astrobot for 1 or 2 levels and then they walked away, and they might not have seen that brilliance, but you continue to play it, just all the little beautiful things that they did, like every single, like, you keep having these moments where, like, oh my God, they outdid themselves. And then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And then you just start thinking, well, damn, I guess this is just the way this game is. And that's kind of how it is. And graphically, it's beautiful. Like, the other thing we can say about Astrobot is it's not about technology, guys. It's not about this dream headset that you're dreaming about that's going to bring your dreams to reality. Look at a vanilla PlayStation 4 unit with a PSVR playing Astrobot. The dream was realized. It's not about the technology. That's why I'm excited for like Quest and stuff, because a truly talented developer doesn't even need incredible technology, and they can make something happen amazingly.
Yep. Chris, I know you haven't, I guess you haven't played it at all, but I know you're going to. So just confirm that you're going to when you get your PlayStation. That's really all you can say at this point.
I really am, and like, it sucks to not be able to play the number 1 VR game of the year. I'm sure all of the PC VR gamers have the same feeling as me. Like, damn, the best VR game was a PSVR exclusive. But I'm excited to try it out, because I think it's the only platform that has that unique feature of tracking in the motion or the gamepad like that. So might as well use it.
Yep. Okay, the next thing I want to do, and we're kind of, at this point, we are off script to a point, and we're just kind of going to see where it takes us. But, I was looking at what we've done, what we have here listed out in 2018, and, we have our top 5, which is, again, to recap, our number 5 was Wipeout, our number 4 was Beat Saber, our number 3 was Brass Tactics, our number 2 was Windlands 2, and then our number 1 we just discussed was Astrobot. And I wanted to compare that against our top 5 last year from 2017. And our number 5 last year was Resident Evil 7, just because of me, because it was my number 1. Our number 4 was Wilson's Heart. Our number 3 was Robo Recall. Our number 2 was Fallout 4 VR. And our number 1 was Lone Echo. So I want to pose a question to everybody here on the roundtable. We're not going to go back to 2016 because we did the show differently in 2016. We didn't do an overall number 1. We did Rift number 1 and Vive number 1. So it didn't really translate. So it's only going to be between these 2 years. But my question to you guys is, which year, using these games as a set, which year was better? And which would you choose? I guess it's the same question, really. If you could only choose 2017 or 2018, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the top 5 games in each of those years, but if you could only, the trope of being stuck on a desert island with your VR headset and Steam and Oculus that can't connect to the internet to get future games, like, would you choose to be limited to 2018? Was 2018 a better year than 2017, or is 2017 the best? So I'll start with you, Gary. What have you say about that?
This is very close. It's very close when you look at this. So again, just very quickly recap: 2017, Resident Evil 7, Wilson's Heart, Robo Recall, Fallout 4 VR, and Lone Echo. And then this year we've got Wipeout, Beat Saber, Brass Tactics, Windlands 2, and Astrobot. To me, it's almost, I could sort of choose one or the other. I don't think I'd be disappointed. If I'm being perfectly honest, I'd probably edge very slightly towards 2017. And part of the reason of that is I love my open worlds. I love Fallout 4 VR. But also Lone Echo, which was our number 1 last year, was such an incredible title for me. One of my most anticipated titles is Lone Echo 2 when it comes out. So I'd probably very slightly edge just purely for those two games, I'd slightly edge to 2017, but there's not a lot in it. I think it could go either way, honestly.
Very good. Anthony, I'll send it to you next. Same question.
Yeah, it's hard, man, because I almost need to like really what I would need to see to make this judgment is I would need to see my personal top 20 of like 2017 and then my personal top 20 of 2018, and then I could probably make a good judgment. But they're both great years. One thing I will argue about is I remember the days of like I used to get a lot of video game magazines and stuff, and then I remember like just hearing podcasts of Flat Games and IGN and Giant Bomb and all this stuff, and everybody would always talk about this is the best year ever for gaming, and it would always be like whatever year you were in was always the best year ever. And it's kind of one of these things where, you know, it's a recency bias. Like if I think about Windlands 2 and Astrobot and Transference and Red Matter and all these great games, it makes me think that definitely 2018. But then I think about Fallout 4. Oh my God, you know, Fallout 4, because I've always been like a Fallout nut. And Robo Recall. It's hard to even think of like I almost think of Robo Recall as a 2016 game, but that was a great game when it first hit. And there's a lot of stuff that isn't on this list, like Oregon Quarter, Archangel. You know, I mean, there's a lot of games that came out in 2017 that you're splitting hairs. They're both great years. We're blessed. Like people say VR has no games. It has games. It just might not have the AAA ones that you're specifically looking for, but VR has plenty of great games.
So to be clear, you're going to run for office and take the politician's route and talk with no answer.
Yeah, okay. So I'll say, like, if we're doing top fives, I will go with 2018. I will go with 2018.
Alrighty, Chris, coming your way. Same question.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Anthony that I'd go with 2018. Just because for me personally, the best parts or the best moments I've had in VR have been multiplayer, and I feel like there's been a lot more multiplayer games out this year that really have that social aspect. Really, the top 5 of 2017 didn't have any multiplayer game. So, you know, here we have, you know, Brass Tactics, Vox Machina. Even Beat Saber multiplayer, even though it's a mod, it's still, you know, something I enjoy doing. So I think based on that, I think 2018 was a much better year for the multiplayer sector of VR. Maybe 2017 was more focused on kind of like the story and the single player narratives, which I do also enjoy. But this year kind of seemed to be the year of multiplayer in some ways.
Wait a minute. 2017 had Talos Principle VR. I've changed my choice.
All right, so I'm going to answer the question. I think I'm in Gary's camp that it's a very, very tight race. It's very hard to choose, and I have to choose because I have to answer the question, right? So I'm going to go with 2017, primarily for Fallout 4, and because I could get Skyrim on PlayStation VR, even though I prefer it on PC VR. I get the best of both, and I got my bad boy Resident Evil 7. And then according to Anthony, Subnautica is a 2017 game, so I get it too. It makes 2017 easy to go with. So I think I would choose 2017, but it is a very tight race. 2018 was a good year. I want to do one more of these exercises because I think they're fun. The next question, and someone actually beat me to it in chat, but let's go around the table one more time, and you have to answer. No political cop-outs here, but your number one overall game, all 3 years, or going all the way back to the beginning of VR, not the beginning of ancient VR, like what Gary did his documentary on, but the beginning of Vive and Rift release. So we'll start from April 2016, and I'll start with you, Gary. Or do you need more time? Do you want to defer?
Well, you don't want me to take the politicians route, but I do want to say that this is a very nuanced question with many different levels that we can attack this on. But I think so. Can I defer? Can I? You just come back to me.
You can defer.
Yeah, just
all
very
right.
quickly.
It's going to it's going to go to Anthony. Hopefully, you run VR game rankings, so like you should have this running list of all these titles that you can just recall at a snap. So, coming your way, best game for you overall, all 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, if you put a gun to my head and you really force this on me, I'd go with Fallout 4 VR simply because that's my jam. My jam is being in a world and like I want to feel like I'm in a movie is what I want to feel like. And Fallout 4 VR puts me into that kind of world. Honestly, what I really want is Fallout 3 VR, but they don't have that. So I'll take Fallout 4 VR. It's the next best thing. And it's almost like 3. And you're in that world. You're completely surrounded. It can be a horror game when these zombies are running at you full speed, those crazy zombies. Like, it can be a horror game. It can be an exploratory game. You could just be going through the wastelands. You're interacting with other characters, and it's got such a huge story. So for me, it's Fallout 4 VR.
Very good answer. Gary, you look like you're stressing and sweating over there. So I'm gonna go to Chris, give you a little more time. Chris, your number one overall game all 3 years.
Yeah, it's still gonna be Lone Echo for me, just because I feel like the impact that's had on VR as a whole, and like the to prove that you can have a narrative experience, you can have like close interactions with another person, even if they're fake, and then you can also have controls that feel so natural that they're real. I feel like that's one of the only games I've ever seen that you can tap your wrist to like do stuff and you actually physically touch your body. I can't stress enough how cool that is. And that game also really is the first game I feel like that nailed locomotion in a way. Like, there's no other game where you have as much free movement as that. Like, with feeling so natural. You're not doing anything arbitrary. You're not like pressing a thumbstick to walk forward. You physically can drag around, and it's just there's no game like that. So I think the Echo universe of games really nailed all the key things needed for a great VR game. So I'd still say Lone Echo is my favorite VR game. Lone Echo 2 will probably end up being my favorite VR game when that comes out.
Okay. And now coming back to you, Gary. I hope you're ready.
Yeah. So I'm looking at this. So of the titles that I've got that are just floating around my head, Elite Dangerous, Fallout 4 VR, Skyrim, and Lone Echo. Now, I think there's just a couple of ways to attack this. 3 of those are basically flat games, so that have been converted over to VR. So I think that's telling. Lone Echo was specifically designed for VR, and I thoroughly enjoyed that experience from start to finish, and it did everything perfectly in VR in terms of the controllers and stuff like that. So I'd sort of want to go for Lone Echo, and yet at the same time, it was I played through it, and I feel like I'm done with that experience now. Elite Dangerous, Skyrim, and Fallout, I'm not finished with those, and I can spend many more hours in each of those games. Overall, I'm tempted to go for Skyrim VR. I think Skyrim VR is probably the one that if you were to, again, like Anthony said earlier, put a gun to my head, what's your favorite VR game? I think I would automatically just say Skyrim VR. But it's very close call between all of these games, honestly.
Yeah, I'm in a similar point. Like, if I list out a few key ones, and there's a different ways of thinking through them. Like, for me, the ones I would list out is Resident Evil 7, Subnautica, Fallout 4, and Skyrim. And, if I could only have one of them, and that's not necessarily the question. The question is, what's your number one overall? And for me, I'll stick to my guns, that I have, and that's Resident Evil 7. Like, it just resonated with me in such a way. But if I was on a desert island and I could only play one, I may switch for the value proposition. I may switch to something like Skyrim or Fallout 4. But so I'll stick with Resident Evil 7, and I'll choose it over Subnautica because it was, my top game before I played Subnautica. But yeah, Fallout 4, Skyrim, Gary, I agree with you. It's a very, very good pick as well. So, it's a very hard choice. And luckily, we don't have to make that choice, and we get to have them all. So there's that. And, with that, I think we're drawing to a close unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up.
Yeah, how about real quick before we bounce out of here, I just wanted to mention a couple of, like, I have a huge list of 2018 releases that I'm looking at here. Just a couple of games that maybe weren't mentioned whatsoever so far that I'll just kind of mention really fast. In Death by Soulfar Studios, I want to mention that. Great game. Sprint Vector, not too bad. We didn't mention that one. Compound, that indie game. The Forest was pretty good this year. Wanted Killer VR, Contagion VR, Seeking Dawn, Electronauts, Torn, Jet Island. You know, we kind of mentioned that just barely. Twilight Path was pretty cool. Transpose, 10 Hearts, you know. So just some other games that came out in 2018 that just kind of deserve a quick little mention.
All right. Very good. I agree. Yeah, those are some good games in there, especially Sprint Vector. I'm surprised it somehow didn't make the cut because I really enjoyed that title. But anyways, this is going to do it. We have wrapped up our Game of the Year 2018. We hope everyone has enjoyed it. I have fun making it. I have fun doing the show. And I look forward to doing it again next year. Gary, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just very quickly, I wanted to just make a note of the amount of effort that Steve puts into these shows on a weekly basis anyway, but also this show in particular. We all contribute, we all come here and we all do various things to make this show happen. But Steve, especially this past week, has gone above and beyond in making this show what it is. There's a lot of effort that goes involved in amalgamating all these trailers together, putting the show together, making sure all these things scroll on at the right time, and also he's also taken on the hosting duties as well this week, which is not an easy thing to do when you're managing all these other things. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and make sure people are aware of that in chat.
Thank you, Gary. Like I was fumbling up in the beginning because I got things all over I feel like I'm operating a station at NASA or something, like so many microprocesses I'm managing here, but I appreciate you pointing that out. Little more detail. We are still undecided. You might not see us again here in 2018, so you definitely will not see us before Christmas. So, first and foremost, happy holidays to everybody. I hope everyone takes time off. I hope everyone gets to play a metric ton amount of VR over the downtime. And if for some reason we don't come back the week between Christmas and New Year's, I'll go ahead and say an early Happy New Year to everybody in the audience. We appreciate all you guys being here. With that said, we are done. Anybody have anything else?
Not really, no. Just wishing everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone.
All right.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for Super Chat, too. Like all the people that have contributed to Super Chat. Thanks so much for that. And thanks for everybody that leaves like an iTunes review and people that comment on our videos, like our videos and all of that. Every little tiny bit helps. Like, seriously, thanks so much.
Yep, we appreciate it again. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.